I'm a 23-year-old woman who lives with my family in my grandparents' house outside the city. Dad works far away, and Mom enjoyed having her folks around to help with me. Sadly, Mom died of cancer 12 years ago. Dad had to keep working, so I stayed with my grandparents. He always makes time for me when he's home. I miss Mom a lot, but overall, life's been okay. When Dad was home, he'd stay in their old room, or we'd go on trips together. Sadly, my grandparents passed away in the last few years. Mom was an only child, and so am I. Her life insurance went to Dad, who used it to fix up the house. They never made them pay rent. It's a bit messy, sorry. Anyway, I'm the only one in my grandma's will, so I got the money, the house, and Grandpa's truck. Dad started dating a few years after Mom died. He never brought anyone home until now. She's young and pretty, with 2 little kids. Dad talked to me about it and asked if they could move in. Since we have plenty of space, I said yes. It's been about 6 months, and now she's pregnant. Dad proposed to her, and I'm happy for him. He's a great dad. But he's not great at talking things out. My soon-to-be stepmom has started pressuring me to move out because they'll need my room for the baby. I think she wants her mom to move in and help out. Dad never mentioned that the house is actually mine, so when he came home last weekend, we had a serious talk. The stepkids have been staying in my grandparents' old room. I have my own room with a big closet and bathroom that Dad added, and he has another big room with a bathroom. She suggested I move to the city to finish school and offer me her apartment at a reduced rate. I waited for Dad to tell her the truth, but he didn't, so I did. I explained that the house is mine and I won't give up my room. I also mentioned that Dad has plenty of savings and could buy them a house, especially if they sold her apartment and used it for a down payment. Now she's upset with me for suggesting Dad use his retirement money. And she doesn't want to sell her apartment because she thinks the market will keep going up and wants to build equity. I made it clear that they should move out before the baby arrives. Am I being unreasonable? Well, tough luck. If you're going to be with a much younger woman, be prepared to support your future children and all that comes with it, instead of trying to save for retirement. It seems like his new partner might have thought he was older and richer, hoping to get more from him, but that idea fell apart when she realized he didn't own the house. It's pretty audacious to ask you to leave but then offer her old place at a discount. So no, OP, you're not in the wrong here. Wow, your dad's really chosen someone special. Even without knowing the house was yours, trying to kick you out to make room for her baby, probably without even talking to your dad first, is pretty thoughtless. It's also pretty unreasonable to expect him to buy a house but not be willing to sell her place to help out. And if he can't stand up to her about it, he's in for a tough time. But that's not your problem. Your dad's a grown-up who's responsible for his own choices. You didn't leave them with no options. She wanted a place without you, and now she can have it. Problem solved. They can make some compromises and find a good living situation. Your stepmom and dad are trying to push you out of your own home, where you've let them and the kids stay for free. It might be a good idea to talk to a lawyer soon. Getting rid of them legally might be tougher than you think. In many places, someone who's been staying with you can become a legal tenant, even if they haven't been paying rent. Story 2. I'm a 30-year-old woman with a young daughter named Lily. My brother James, 32, recently got married to Brittany, who's 26. Before they got together, I knew Brittany casually, but we weren't close. James and I, however, are really tight. When James proposed to Brittany and they started planning the wedding, they made it clear that Lily and I would be involved. They even said Lily would be a flower girl and I would be the maid of honor. But a few weeks before the wedding, Brittany came to talk to me. She said her family had concerns about having kids at the ceremony, so they decided to make it adults only. However, Lily was still invited to the reception. So I said something like, "Sure, it's your big day. I'll do whatever James wants." Then came the rehearsal. Everything was going smoothly until Brittany's 3 young nieces trotted in as junior bridesmaids. I was puzzled and a bit irritated, but I brushed it off. Later, James took me aside and confessed that Brittany was worried Lily might cause a scene and ruin the wedding, hence the fib about it being child-free. I was hurt and upset that they thought that about my daughter, but I kept my cool. I had already made arrangements for a friend to look after Lily during the ceremony and join us later for the reception. James acknowledged my feelings and disagreed with Lily not being invited. On the wedding day, Brittany asked why Lily wasn't there while we were getting ready. I explained she was with a friend and would join us later. Brittany insisted on calling to bring Lily for the photos, fearing people would wonder why she was missing, and it would reflect poorly on her. I told her she could call, but my friend was aware of the plan and wouldn't come until I asked her to. Brittany called James, hoping he'd persuade me to change my mind, but he understood the arrangement and didn't see any issue with it. She then asked what to say if people noticed Lily's absence in the photos. I suggested she explain that Lily wasn't invited due to concerns about tantrums. That didn't sit well with her, and she called me a name and accused me of being too sensitive. The rest of the wedding was uncomfortable, to say the least, with other drama going on within the party unrelated to our situation. James shared the wedding photos with our family group chats, and now extended family members are asking why Lily isn't in any of them. I've explained what happened, and while my mom supports me, my aunts and uncles think I overreacted. Do you think I'm the one at fault here? What a mess. But honestly, I don't think I am. Why should your daughter be in the pictures if she wasn't invited? But I'm curious, why is your family so worried about her having a tantrum? Is this something that happens often? No, tantrums aren't typical for her. It's really out of character. Originally, I was just a bridesmaid, but some drama led Brittany to make me the maid of honor. The bride and groom made it clear it was their decision who was invited. Lying to you about it was really unfair. They don't have an excuse there. They're trying to make it seem like kids were welcome when Lily was actually excluded. It's their big day, and that should be respected, but it doesn't mean using your daughter for photos or misleading the family about her being invited. Exactly, Brittany got what she wanted. Lily wasn't at the ceremony but was at the reception. Sometimes we need to be careful what we wish for. The photos tell the story perfectly, and when people ask, make sure to mention how Brittany lied about the wedding being child-free. Story 3. I'm a 25-year-old woman married to my 27-year-old husband, and I've been hearing nonstop about this from my in-laws. My husband has a younger sister, Alice, who's 22, and in my opinion, she can be quite difficult. Alice had some health issues as a child, but she managed to overcome them. However, her parents were extremely lenient with her, to the point where she couldn't be corrected without it turning into a big deal. She's lost several jobs because of this, and she doesn't have many friends. She always needs to be the center of attention. So on my other sister-in-law's birthday, their parents bought Alice a gift just to avoid her getting jealous. As for me, I'm an only child, and my best friend, Marie, is like a sister to me. We've been inseparable since 3rd grade, bonding instantly because we were both only children. We're fiercely protective of each other. When my husband and I decided to have a summer wedding, I was surprised to see Alice show up wearing a lacy white dress. I might have believed you if you said she ordered it from a wedding catalog. Between the ceremony and the main reception, there was a cocktail hour. I started getting annoyed because so many people kept asking me about Alice. They mistook her for my husband's ex instead of his sister. I could see that Marie was getting upset too. She walked over to my husband's family and gave them a piece of her mind. On her way back, she tripped and spilled her glass of red wine near Alice. Alice dashed to the bathroom, followed by my mother-in-law, while my father-in-law came over demanding that Marie leave. I refused, explaining that Marie is a lightweight and it was just an accident. My husband supported me, pointing out that Marie's slim build means she can't handle as much alcohol, but we promised to make sure she sobered up before the reception. At the reception, Alice looked stunning in a beautiful green dress, and Marie miraculously felt better. My in-laws haven't stopped talking about the incident, but I find it hard to feel guilty, even though I know it wasn't an accident. You're definitely not in the wrong, and your best friend is amazing. That's true friendship. Don't let your in-laws make you feel bad or guilty. They need to stop coddling Alice and move on from this childish behavior. Maybe it's time to have a frank conversation with them and tell them to grow up. It's great that your husband stood by you. Another approach could have been for him to talk to his sister directly and tell her she needs to change her behavior. I get why he might hesitate, but standing up to his family would show his wife that he's got her back and they're a team. He probably didn't want his wedding day to turn into a scene with his sister throwing a fit in front of everyone. Your in-laws might have enabled her behavior, and your friend was just trying to fix the white dress situation. It's common knowledge not to wear white to a wedding. And since Alice had a backup dress, what's the big deal? And if she ever finds someone to marry her, just wait for the chance to accidentally announce your pregnancy at her wedding. It seems like some people just can't stand to see others shine. My sister-in-law is quite the character. I once saw her shed tears because she didn't get a turkey leg at Thanksgiving dinner when she was just 20. Now, as I'm preparing for my own wedding in 3 months, I've sent out the invitations with clear instructions. Avoid wearing white, for obvious reasons, and stick to emerald green for the bridesmaids' dresses. I've also requested RSVPs by a certain date, as the reception dinner is quite pricey and I don't want to pay for no-shows. Other than that, guests can wear whatever they like. Kids and families are welcome, and I'm not too fussed about attire, except for those specific colors. Just to give you some background, my sister-in-law is my fiance's sister. While we're not super close, we have an okay relationship, we don't hate each other, and we get along fine. During my fiance's birthday bash, some friends and I got to talking about the wedding plans. They remarked on how laid back I seemed about the rules and how refreshing it was not to feel like they were walking on eggshells. I explained that I just wanted everyone to have a good time, so I didn't want to impose too many restrictions. Later, the girlfriend of one of my fiance's friends showed me the dress she was considering for our wedding and asked for my opinion on whether it was appropriate or did she steal the spotlight. It was a bold yellow number, but I genuinely liked it and encouraged her to wear it. I assured her that as the bride, it's not easy to outshine me, and even if someone did, it wouldn't bother me too much. I didn't mean any harm by it, but my sister-in-law took offense and called me pretentious. She was upset because she had strict rules at her own wedding, like no kids and a strict dress code, and we followed them without complaint. I never meant to upset her. I was simply explaining my own wedding plans and the reasoning behind them. But she accused me of subtly undermining her and called me a snake, insisting that if I had something to say, I should say it to her face. Then she stormed out with her husband. My mother-in-law agreed that my sister-in-law overreacted, but she also said I shouldn't have flaunted my laid-back approach, as it may have made her feel bad about her own wedding choices. However, my fiancé and I didn't do anything wrong, and eventually my sister-in-law will have to move on. Am I in the wrong here? Definitely not. It seems like she's internalizing her own issues and projecting them onto me. She might also be jealous that I'm taking a more relaxed approach to my wedding planning. I won't apologize to her. She's the one being dramatic. It's like the saying goes, some people think the world revolves around them. But in this case, it's my sister-in-law. I can't control how she reacts or make her see that it's not about her. On a lighter note, it's quite impressive how she managed to keep her bridezilla tendencies even when it's someone else's wedding. Maybe her strict wedding rules were meant to prevent someone else from stealing her thunder. But in the end, it's my day, and I'm going to do it my way. Thank you for the congratulations, and I'm looking forward to a fantastic wedding. We had a new colleague, Christina, join our team, a friendly woman in her late 30s who's married with kids. We had several chats before becoming close. But one day, while she was sitting, her cleavage became more noticeable. The office atmosphere grew awkward, and some of the guys started avoiding eye contact. It was a minor issue, but it kept happening. A couple of my male coworkers confided in me about feeling uncomfortable with Christina's attire. Being more of a tomboy, they felt at ease discussing it with me. They mentioned feeling uneasy encountering a similar situation to the one I described. I couldn't help but notice that all of Christina's tops seemed designed to show cleavage. The next day, I casually mentioned to her how her cleavage was on display. She didn't respond, just nodded. So I decided to ask Christina if she intentionally chose clothes that accentuated her cleavage. She seemed offended and asked if there was a problem. I expressed that it made me feel uncomfortable if that was the case, especially in a professional setting with male colleagues around. She became upset and questioned why it was any of my business what she wore. I clarified that she could wear whatever she wanted, but some colleagues felt uneasy being exposed to such attire at work. She retorted that it wasn't my business and suggested that those who had issues with her clothing should confront her directly instead of hiding behind me. We argued, and while some female coworkers agreed with me, they also mentioned that I could have worded my concerns more tactfully. Christina started avoiding some of us, which seemed unprofessional since part of our job involves interacting with each other. When I tried to approach her to discuss the situation, it led to another argument. She threatened to involve the administrators if I persisted, but my intention was simply to address the issue and find a resolution. Do you think I overstepped by saying that to her? Those male colleagues must be thrilled with your behavior, huh? You're trying to set yourself apart from other women to gain their approval, aren't you? But let's be clear, her cleavage is none of your concern, okay? It's her choice how she dresses. What you and the guys are doing is body shaming. If I were her, I'd take this to HR. If the men are uncomfortable, maybe they need a reminder about self-control. Shame on you for getting involved. You're definitely in the wrong here. Being a woman doesn't give you the right to dictate how your coworkers dress. You're not her boss, and you're not enforcing a dress code violation. You're just trying to impose your own standards on her. Whether she's married with kids or not is irrelevant. Focus on your own work, and if coworkers try to gossip, keep it to yourself.
Jane, you seriously need a break from all these dusty books. It's Clara's birthday bash tonight. You gotta join us. Liz practically commanded, her voice laced with that mix of concern and exasperation she reserved just for me. I'm Jane, a 34-year-old English literature professor, more comfortable dissecting Shakespeare's sonnets than navigating social gatherings. Fine, Liz. But if it's a snooze fest, I'm holding you responsible, I replied, marking my place in Hamlet with a sigh. That evening, Clara's party was in full swing, a whirl of laughter and clinking glasses. That's where I met Alex. He was the finance guy, his world of stocks and assets as distant from my literary haven as could be. Yet, something clicked, a spark neither of us could deny. Shakespeare, huh? That's pretty highbrow. I'm more about the Wall Street Journal than the Globe Theatre, Alex joked, his smile infectious. I chuckled, the warmth in his eyes softening my usual reserve. Well, perhaps I can show you that literature has its own charms. Might even teach you a thing or two about the human condition, I quipped, finding myself surprisingly at ease. The conversation didn't skip a beat, flowing as smoothly as the evening breeze. Soon, our casual meets turned into late-night talks, and before we knew it, we were inseparable. The idea of us seemed as natural as the turning of pages in one of my books. Meeting Alex's mother, Elaine, was like stepping into a scene from a novel. She exuded warmth and elegance, her demeanor as inviting as the home she welcomed me into. Jane, dear, it's so wonderful to finally meet you. Alex hasn't stopped talking about you. I feel like I know you already, Elaine greeted me, her voice a soothing melody. It's an absolute pleasure to meet you too, Elaine. Alex speaks so highly of you, I responded, genuinely touched by her kindness. The day Alex came to visit my family home was a chapter on its own. The awe in his eyes was unmistakable as he took in the sprawling estate, the tangible proof of my father's success. Your family's place is something else, Jane. Your dad must have a Midas touch with investments, Alex remarked, his voice a mix of admiration and something else I couldn't quite place. He's done well for himself, indeed. The stock exchange has been kind to him, I replied, my pride in my family's achievements shining through. My parents embraced Alex with open arms, his charm and apparent adoration for me sealing his place in their hearts. The stage was set, our roles as the perfect couple cemented. The wedding was a dream, a celebration of love and promises of a shared future. The days following our wedding were supposed to be the happiest of my life. Instead, they turned into a relentless storm of heartache and dread. Dad, the strongest man I knew, was suddenly confined to a hospital bed, his strength waning under the cruel grip of cancer. The hospital's sterile, white walls became our grim reality, the beeping of machines a constant, unwelcome soundtrack. One bleak evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the hospital room, Dad called me over with a feeble gesture. His eyes, once so full of life, now mirrored the fatigue and pain he was enduring. Jane, my darling, he began, his voice barely above a whisper, I need you to be strong. I've made arrangements for you, for after I'm gone. There's an inheritance, $2 million. It's yours, my dear. I want you to have a secure future. I gripped his hand, the cold reality of his words piercing my heart. Dad, please, don't talk like that. You're going to get through this. But before I could absorb the gravity of his revelation, Alex, who had been lingering by the door, stepped forward, his reaction sending a chill down my spine. "2 million, sir? That's quite a fortune. I mean, Jane, we need to think about how to manage this blessing," he said, his tone unsettlingly eager, his gaze not meeting mine. The days turned into an agonizing cycle of hospital visits and silent, tension-filled nights at home. Alex's demeanor had shifted. The man I had fallen in love with seemed consumed by thoughts of the inheritance, his warmth replaced by a cold, calculating distance. One night, as we sat in the dim glow of our living room, the silence between us thick and suffocating, Alex broke the stillness, his words like a cold gust in an already frigid room. "Jane, we need to talk about the future, about the inheritance. Think about it, we could really turn our lives around. A luxury home, maybe travel the world. It's time to start planning, don't you think?" he urged, his eyes not quite meeting mine. I stared at him, disbelief and anger swirling within me. "Planning? My dad is lying in a hospital bed, fighting for his life, and you're here making plans for a future splurge? Is that all you care about, Alex? The money?" He recoiled, as if my words were physical blows. No, Jane, you've got it all wrong. I'm just trying to look out for us, for our future. I didn't mean to." But his words rang hollow, the apology a feeble attempt to mask the naked greed that had seeped into his voice. In that moment, a painful truth began to dawn on me. The man I had vowed to spend my life with was a stranger, his thoughts not on the profound loss we were about to face, but on the financial gain it would bring. Life after Dad's diagnosis was like walking through a never-ending fog. My home, once a place of laughter and warmth, felt cold, the air thick with unsaid words and hidden agendas. Elaine, Alex's mom, came into our lives like she was the cavalry, ready to save the day. But her eyes, sharp and calculating, told a different story. "Jane, honey, you're worn to a thread," Elaine said one evening, her voice smooth but with an edge that made me uneasy. "Let me help around here. You shouldn't carry all this alone." I was too tired, too beaten down by the relentless waves of worry, to argue. "Thanks, Elaine. I appreciate it, I really do," I replied, trying to muster a smile. But the real storm was still brewing, quietly, sneakily. That night, Elaine came to my room with a small bottle in her hand. "Jane, you look like you could use some real rest. These will help you sleep. Trust me," she said, pushing the bottle of pills towards me. Something in her insistence set off alarm bells in my mind, but the promise of a few hours free from my racing thoughts was too tempting. "All right, I'll give them a try." "Thanks, Elaine," I said, though a part of me was screaming to throw the pills away. No sooner had she left than whispers from the living room reached my ears, a low murmur of conspiracy that pulled me out of my bed and towards the door. I cracked it open, the sliver of light from the living room casting long shadows on the floor. Alex's voice, usually so warm and loving, was cold, almost cruel. "She's out like a light, Mom. Those pills knock her right out. We can talk business now," he said, a hint of glee in his tone that turned my blood to ice. Elaine's reply was a quiet, venomous chuckle. "Perfect. Now, about that inheritance. Half of it is legally yours, you know. We're talking about a serious cash injection." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. These were the people who were supposed to be my family, my support. Instead, they were plotting like villains in one of the tragedies I taught in class. Alex's next words were a punch to the gut. "Half? That's kids' play, Mom. I want the whole pie. We need to figure out how to get Jane to sign it all over. Once I have the cash, I can cut her loose." I stood there, my hand on the doorknob, feeling like the floor had just dropped away from under me. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a full-blown conspiracy, a plan to rob me of my inheritance, my dignity, my life as I knew it. The morning sun did little to brighten the heavy atmosphere in the house after I uncovered Alex and Elaine's despicable scheme. Sitting at the kitchen table, the untouched coffee in front of me turned cold, a stark reminder of the chilling conversation I had overheard. The betrayal felt like a gaping wound, and I was at a loss, unsure how to navigate this treacherous storm. Mom entered the kitchen, her steps firm, her presence always a beacon of strength in our home. She noticed my distress immediately, her perceptive eyes missing nothing. "Jane, what's wrong? You're as pale as a ghost. Talk to me," she urged, her voice a blend of concern and command. I hesitated, the weight of betrayal heavy on my tongue. But seeing the unwavering support in her eyes, I found the courage to confess. "Mom, it's Alex and Elaine. I overheard them last night. They're plotting, scheming to take Dad's inheritance, and then, they plan to leave me with nothing." The kitchen fell silent, the air thick with tension. Mom's face remained stoic, but her eyes were sharp, a storm brewing in their depths. "Is that so?" she said calmly, her voice betraying no hint of the rage I knew she must be feeling. "Well, they've picked the wrong family to mess with. We're not pawns in their little game, Jane. We're the ones who'll be calling checkmate." Her words were like a lifeline, pulling me back from the edge of despair. "But how, Mom? They've got everything planned out." "It's like they've been setting this trap for a long time," I replied, the enormity of the situation threatening to overwhelm me. Mom's smile was thin but determined. "Planning is one thing, executing is another. They think they're clever, but they're not the only ones who can play this game. We need to be strategic, think 2 steps ahead." The kitchen became our war room, the table a battleground where strategies were formed and tactics were laid out. "First, we need to secure your assets, make sure they can't get their hands on what's rightfully yours," Mom said, her mind racing through the legal labyrinths. "But Mom, the inheritance is huge, and it's all in my name. How can we protect it from them?" I asked, the problem seeming insurmountable. She gave me a look that was both fierce and reassuring. "We'll consult with the best lawyers, set up trusts, do whatever it takes. Your father didn't work his whole life for his legacy to fall into the hands of vultures." As the plan took shape, I felt a spark of hope ignite within me. "Mom, you're incredible. I don't know what I'd do without you." Her hand reached across the table, gripping mine with a strength that bolstered my resolve. "You're your father's daughter, Jane, strong and smart. You'll never have to face anything alone. Now, let's put our plan into action and show those snakes they've bitten off more than they can chew." The day of the will reading was like the calm before the storm. The notary's office was stark and formal, a stark contrast to the turmoil churning in my heart. Alex and Elaine were there, their faces poorly masked with faux solemnity, but their eyes, hungry and calculating, betrayed their true intentions. The notary, a stern-faced man with a no-nonsense air, cleared his throat, breaking the tense silence. "We are gathered here to read the last will and testament of Mr. James Harrington. As per his wishes, the contents of the will are to be disclosed in the presence of his immediate family." Alex leaned in, a wolfish grin barely concealed. "This is it, Jane. Our new beginning," he whispered, his breath cold against my ear. I stiffened, repulsed by his proximity and the implication of his words. Before I could respond, the notary began to speak, his voice formal and detached. "Mr. Harrington bequeathed the sum of $2 million to his daughter, Jane Harper." A gasp escaped Elaine, her facade crumbling for a moment to reveal the greed that lay beneath. Alex's hand twitched, a visceral reaction to the mention of the money. He was about to congratulate me, no doubt seeing dollar signs, when the notary continued. "However, it is also stated here that Mr. Harrington incurred debts amounting to $2.5 million. The room went cold. Alex's face drained of color, his earlier excitement replaced by shock and disbelief. Elaine's mouth opened and closed, a fish out of water, her plans unraveling before her eyes. "This can't be right," Alex stammered, his composure shattered. "There must be some mistake." The notary, unfazed, pushed forward a stack of documents. "I assure you, everything is documented and legal. Mr. Harrington's assets and liabilities are now passed on to his next of kin." Elaine's eyes darted between the papers and my stoic face. But that means, half of the debt is Alex's responsibility too? Yes, ma'am. According to the law, marital assets and liabilities are shared, the notary confirmed, his voice devoid of sympathy. The revelation hit Alex and Elaine like a physical blow. Their dream of wealth had turned into a nightmare of debt. Elaine's earlier warmth vanished, her true nature, venomous and self-serving, coming to the forefront. "We're not paying for this. It's her father's mess," Elaine hissed, her earlier facade of the doting mother-in-law gone. Alex, desperation creeping into his voice, turned to me. "Jane, we need to sort this out. You can't let this happen." I looked at him, the man I once loved, now a stranger driven by greed and deceit. "Sort this out? Alex, you made your intentions clear. You're not in this for me or for us. You're in this for the money." The room was thick with tension, the notary a silent observer to the drama unfolding before him. In that moment, the storm broke, the veil lifted, revealing the true colors of the people I had once called family. But as I stood there, facing the betrayal and the mountain of debt before me, I knew I wasn't alone. Mom's hand found mine, her grip firm and reassuring. "We'll handle this, Jane. Together," she whispered, her voice a bastion of strength. Alex and Elaine, initially struck dumb by the revelation, quickly erupted into a whirlwind of fury and disbelief. "This is insane!" Alex bellowed, his face contorting with anger. "Are you seriously telling me this pile of papers is for real? Show them again, this can't be happening." The notary, a pillar of calm amidst the storm, methodically laid out the documents once more. Each line, each number, was a testament to a reality they couldn't escape. Elaine, her composure shattered, turned her venom towards me. "You knew, didn't you? You and your mother planned this. You're trying to drown us in your family's mess." That's when Mom stood up. Her presence filled the room, a quiet force amidst the chaos. "Enough," she said, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "My husband had his faults, his vices. The gambling, the debts, they were his burden. And now, according to the law, they are shared by Jane and Alex." Elaine's face was a mask of rage, her earlier facade of kindness nowhere to be seen. "We're not paying for someone else's mistakes. We won't let this happen." Cornered and desperate, Alex played his final, desperate card. "If that's how it's going to be, then fine. I want a divorce. And in that agreement, we'll make it crystal clear, neither of us gets anything from the other. No claims, no money, no property. Nothing." His words, meant to intimidate, only fueled my newfound resolve. "A divorce? That's the best idea you've had in a long time, Alex. Let's make it official. You walk away empty-handed. No ties, no debts, no nothing." The agreement was drafted with clinical precision, a clear, unambiguous document that severed the ties that once bound us. We signed it, each stroke of the pen marking the end of a chapter, the end of a farce disguised as a marriage. After signing the divorce papers, the heavy door of the notary's office closed behind us with a thud that felt final. The crisp air outside did little to clear the heaviness that hung over me. Alex and Elaine, their masks of pretense thoroughly discarded now, couldn't contain their contempt. "Well, Jane, looks like you're stuck with the short end of the stick. $500,000 in debt. That's quite a hole you're in," Alex sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. Elaine's laugh was cold, void of any warmth she once feigned. "You really thought you could outsmart us? Enjoy paying off your father's mess." Just then, Mom stepped forward, her demeanor calm but with an undercurrent of steel. "You two might want to hold off on your celebrations. You see, there's more to this story." Alex scoffed, his arrogance unshaken. "What could you possibly say to change anything now, Mrs. Harrington?" Mom's smile was enigmatic, a prelude to the revelation that was about to turn the tables. "Well, for starters, Jane's not alone in this. I'm here, and unlike what you've been led to believe, the real financial genius in this family has always been me." Elaine's smirk faltered, confusion clouding her features. Alex's expression mirrored his mother's, disbelief and curiosity warring on his face. I've been the one managing the successful investments, the stock market ventures, not my late husband. My net worth? It's currently around $70 million. And yes, Jane is my sole heir. The impact of Mom's words hit Alex and Elaine like a physical blow, their smugness evaporating, replaced by shock and a dawning realization of the grave miscalculation they had made. Alex, the color draining from his face, stammered, 70 million? But that means. Mom's gaze was unwavering, her voice firm. It means, Alex, that you and your mother have been chasing shadows while ignoring the real treasure. Jane's inheritance from me will secure her future. As for the debts left by her father, consider them settled. I won't have my daughter burdened by them. Elaine's mouth opened and closed, words failing her for the first time. Alex, his knees seemingly unable to support him, sank to the ground, his earlier bravado shattered. Please, Jane, I didn't know. I was wrong. Forgive me, he pleaded, his voice barely a whisper, the mask of the cunning strategist gone, leaving only a desperate man in its wake. But it was too late for apologies, too late for regrets. I looked down at the man I once loved, now a stranger groveling at my feet. Forgiveness is earned, Alex, not begged for. You made your choice, and now you have to live with it. Turning my back on Alex and Elaine, Mom and I walked away, their pleas and protests fading into the background. The last laugh was indeed ours, but it wasn't one of triumph or joy. It was a laugh that acknowledged the end of a painful chapter and the beginning of a new, hopeful journey. The debt, the deceit, the heartbreak, they were all behind us now. Ahead lay a path of healing and rebuilding, with the strength and wisdom of a bond that no storm could break. The last laugh was a promise of brighter days, of a future where the shadows of the past no longer loomed over us. It was the laughter of freedom, of liberation from the chains of greed and betrayal. And as we stepped into the light of a new dawn, it was the laughter that heralded the beginning of a new chapter, written on our own terms, in our own time. The dust had settled, and the dawn of a new day brought clarity and a profound sense of peace. My life, once entangled with Alex and Elaine's deceit, was now my own. Yet, the echoes of their betrayal hadn't faded completely. Alex, in a last-ditch effort to salvage what he had lost, showed up on my doorstep, his eyes hollow, his stance one of desperation. Jane, please, you have to listen to me. I was wrong, terribly wrong. Can't we just start over, forget all that happened? He pleaded, his voice a mix of regret and fear. I looked at him, the man I once thought I knew, and felt nothing but detachment. Start over? After everything you did? Alex, you don't seem to understand. It's over. There's nothing left to say. Before he could respond, a sharp knock interrupted our standoff. Two men, faces stern and purposeful, stood at my doorstep. Are you Jane Harper? We're here about the debts your husband accrued. He's been borrowing money, making some risky deals, and it's time to settle up. The news didn't shock me as much as it might have before. Alex's capacity for deception seemed boundless. But I was prepared, the pain and betrayal I had endured had forged a resilience I never knew I had. I invited them in, offering a seat but not comfort. I understand this is a difficult situation, but I'm afraid you're knocking on the wrong door. Alex's face went pale, his eyes darting between me and the creditors, the reality of his situation sinking in. I calmly presented the divorce papers, the ink dry but the words echoing the finality of our severed ties. As you can see, we're no longer connected legally. Any debts he incurred are his and his alone. We made it explicitly clear in our divorce agreement, no claims on each other's assets or debts. The creditors scanned the documents, their expressions turning from frustration to understanding. Seems like you've got everything in order, ma'am. We're sorry to bother you. We'll take this up with Mr. Alex Harper directly. As they stood up to leave, Alex reached out, desperation clear in his voice. Jane, please, you can't let them do this. I'm ruined without your help. I looked at him, a man drowning in the consequences of his own greed and deceit. Alex, you made your choices. Now you have to live with them. It's time you faced your own storms. With the closing of the door, the chapter of Alex and Elaine finally ended, their presence in my life, nothing more than a harsh lesson learned. The dawn of this new day wasn't just the rising of the sun. It was the rising of a stronger, wiser me, a woman who had weathered the storm and emerged not just intact, but empowered. Life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it. That's how I met Marco. My name's Cora, and I was 28, working as a fitness trainer at a local gym, living a life as structured and disciplined as my fitness routines. That's until Marco walked in one day, looking for a quick workout, and ended up changing my whole life's course. Hey, I'm Marco, he said, flashing a smile that could light up the darkest of rooms. Heard this is the best place to get in shape. Mind showing me the ropes? I raised an eyebrow, sizing him up. He didn't look like the usual gym type, more like he spent his days charming his way through life. Sure, Marco. Follow my lead, and you'll be in shape in no time. But I warn you, I don't go easy on anyone. Marco chuckled, his eyes twinkling with mischief. Wouldn't have it any other way. Lead on, Cora. Training Marco was like trying to tame a wild stallion. He had energy for days and a stubborn streak to match. But beneath the jokes and easy banter, there was a genuine respect, a connection that neither of us could deny. The days turned into weeks, and our sessions at the gym became the highlight of my days. It wasn't just about the workouts anymore, it was the laughter, the stories, the shared moments in between the sweat and hard work. One evening, as we were wrapping up, Marco turned to me, a serious look replacing his usual grin. Cora, I've got to tell you something. I'm not just here for the workouts. I'm here for you. You've got this fire, this strength that I've never seen in anyone else. And I'm crazy about you. I was taken aback. This was Marco, the guy who joked about everything, now standing in front of me, bare and honest. Marco, I don't know what to say. You're not what I expected. But I can't deny it, there's something between us. Something real. That was the start of our whirlwind romance. It was intense, passionate, like a storm that sweeps everything in its path. And before I knew it, I was saying I do to the man who had walked into my gym and turned my world upside down. But the fairy tale didn't last long. After the wedding, Marco dropped a bombshell that would set the stage for the battles to come. Cora, we need to move into my mother's house. I've got strong family ties, and it's important for me to be there for them. I felt my stomach drop. Maria, his mother, was a force to be reckoned with, her sharp tongue and critical eye a stark contrast to Marco's warmth. And then there was Sophia, his sister, a mirror image of her mother's arrogance and disdain. Marco, are you sure about this? Your mother and Sophia, our relationship is strained, to put it mildly. Is this really the best idea? I asked, trying to keep the worry out of my voice. Marco took my hands in his gaze earnest. Cora, I know it's not ideal. But family is everything to me. We'll make it work, I promise. You, me, and our little family against the world. Moving into Marco's family home felt like stepping onto a battlefield every day. Maria's house was a fortress, her rules, her way, or the highway. And Sophia, she was like her shadow, echoing her mother's every frown and snide remark. Morning, Cora, Maria would say, her voice dripping with something that was anything but warmth. Don't forget the dishes need doing, and the living room needs a good dusting. We run a tight ship here. I'd nod, biting back the retort that threatened to spill. Of course, Maria. I wouldn't want the house anything less than perfect. Sophia would smirk from her perch at the kitchen table, her eyes scanning me like I was some bug under a microscope. Yeah, Cora. And try to keep up, will ya? We don't need any dead weight around here. The days were long, the work unending. It was like living in a loop, each day a repeat of the last. Cleaning, cooking, trying to find my footing in a house that felt more like a minefield. Marco was there, but not really. His restaurant was his world, and I was just a ghost in his family home. But then, life decided to throw me a curveball. I was pregnant. The news should have been a beacon of joy, but in Maria's house, it was just another ripple in already troubled waters. Pregnant, huh? Maria's voice was flat, her eyes hard. Well, don't expect any special treatment. This house doesn't run itself, you know. I held my ground, my hand instinctively resting on my belly. I don't expect special treatment, Maria. But I do expect some understanding. I'm carrying a child, your grandchild. That shut her up, if only for a moment. But it didn't last. The chores piled up, the glares grew sharper, and the house felt smaller with each passing day. Sophia was no help. She watched me struggle, a satisfied smirk never far from her lips. "You're slowing down, Cora," she'd taunt. "Can't handle a bit of housework? What kind of mother are you gonna be?" I wanted to scream, to lash out. But I held it in. For Marco, for the tiny heartbeat that was growing stronger each day. The tension was a constant companion, an uninvited guest at every meal, every moment. Marco, he tried, in his way. But his family, his restaurant, they pulled him in 1,000 different directions, and I was just one more voice in the cacophony of his life. "Marco, talk to them, please," I pleaded one night, the weight of the day heavy on my shoulders. "Your mother, Sophia, they treat me like I'm nothing, like I don't belong." Marco sighed, a tired sound that spoke volumes. "Cora, they're just set in their ways. It's how they've always been. Just give it time, it'll get better." But it didn't get better. It got harder, the house more suffocating, Maria and Sophia more relentless. And me, I was just trying to keep my head above water, to protect the tiny life that depended on me. As I lay in bed each night, the moon casting shadows across the room, I made a silent vow. I wouldn't let them break me. I wouldn't let their words, their disdain, define me. I was stronger than they knew, and one day, they'd see. One day, this house, this battlefield, it would be mine to conquer. Becoming a mother was supposed to be the most beautiful chapter of my life. But in Maria's house, it felt more like a trial by fire. Luca was my little bundle of joy, my ray of sunshine in the storm. Yet, every cry, every smile, was overshadowed by the relentless pressure and criticism from Maria and Sophia. "Really, Cora, can't you keep that child quiet?" Maria would snap, her words sharp as knives, every time Luca so much as whimpered. I held Luca closer, whispering words of comfort, shielding him from the harshness of his own grandmother's words. "He's just a baby, Maria. Babies cry. That's how they communicate." Sophia would roll her eyes, her voice dripping with disdain. "Oh, please. You're just not doing it right, Cora. Maybe if you paid more attention to him instead of feeling sorry for yourself, he'd be quieter." Their words stung, each one a reminder of how out of place I felt in this house, in this family. But it wasn't just the words. It was the way they looked at me, the way they scrutinized my every move, especially after my body had changed from the pregnancy. The weight I'd gained became their favorite topic, a source of endless ridicule. "Looks like those fitness trainer days are long gone, huh, Cora?" Maria would chuckle, eyeing my figure with a smirk. "Better lay off the sweets if you want to fit into your old clothes again." I clenched my fists, forcing a smile to hide the hurt. "I'm proud of my body, Maria. It brought Luca into this world. The weight? It's temporary. But the love I have for my son, that's forever." But my words, my defiance, it didn't matter to them. I was the outsider, the intruder in their perfect little world. And no matter how hard I tried, it never seemed to be enough. Enough was enough. The constant belittling from Maria and Sophia wasn't just chipping away at my spirit, it was igniting a fire within me. A fire to reclaim my life, my body, and my self-respect. I decided to take my journey into my own hands, right there in the four walls of that suffocating house. I started simple, turning a corner of my room into my personal gym. It wasn't much, just a mat, some weights, and a determination as strong as steel. "This is it, Luca," I whispered to my little boy, cradling him in one arm while setting up my phone to record. "Mommy's turning it all around, starting now." The first few days were tough, the exercises leaving me breathless, my muscles screaming. But each drop of sweat, each aching limb, felt like a triumph. "Think you can just bounce back, Cora?" Maria sneered one day, watching me pant through my routine. "It's not that easy, you know. Takes more than a few stretches to fix what's broken." I wiped my brow, fixing her with a steely gaze. "Watch me, Maria. I'm not just fixing what's broken. I'm building something stronger. And I don't need your approval or your snide comments." That's when I decided to go public with my journey. I started a YouTube channel and an Instagram page, sharing every struggle, every victory. It was raw, it was real, and to my surprise, it resonated with so many out there. "Mom, look at this," I'd say to Luca, showing him the screen filled with comments and likes. "We're not alone. There are so many rooting for us." And then came the advertisers, their offers turning my little corner of the internet into a thriving source of income. I was stunned, overwhelmed, but above all, I was empowered. "Can you believe this, Luca?" I'd whisper, tucking him into bed. "We're doing it. We're really doing it." But with every success, the tension in the house grew thicker. Maria and Sophia couldn't stand it, the way I'd turned their ridicule into my armor, their disdain into my driving force. "What's this now, Cora? Playing the star while the rest of us do the real work?" Sophia spat one day, her eyes venomous. I stood my ground, Luca on my hip, my heart stronger than ever. "It's called turning the tide, Sophia. It's called taking back control. And if that bothers you, well, that's your problem, not mine." The house that once felt like a prison was now just a backdrop. My world was larger, brighter, filled with the love of my son and the support of a community that saw me, the real me. The success of my online channels was a sweet victory, but it brought a new kind of challenge. Marco was stunned by the numbers, the comments, the sheer scale of it. But his pride was bruised. He didn't want the world, especially his family, to see the shift in our roles. "Cora, it's incredible. But you know how my mother and Sophia are. Please, let's keep this between us. I don't want them thinking I'm not the provider," he pleaded one evening, his eyes begging for understanding. I sighed, the weight of his request heavy on my shoulders. "Marco, I'm proud of what I've achieved. It's not just about the money, it's about respect, about independence." He nodded, his hand reaching for mine. "I know, and I respect that. But in this house, it's complicated. Let's just keep it our little secret, for now." I agreed, reluctantly, and began transferring $4,000 a month to Marco's account. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. Maria and Sophia continued their tirade, oblivious to the truth. They saw me as a leech, living off their precious son and brother. "You're just a freeloader, Cora. Always taking, never contributing," Maria would snarl, her words sharp as ever. I bit back my retort, the secret of my success a silent shield against her barbs. "I contribute in my own way, Maria. Not that you'd ever acknowledge it." Sophia was no better. "What do you even do all day, Cora? Lounge around while we do all the real work?" Their ignorance was a bitter pill, but I swallowed it. My focus was Luca, my channels, my newfound strength. I'd walk with my son in the park, my camera a constant companion, capturing the moments, the workouts, the real me that they refused to see. "Cora, you're wasting your time with those videos," Maria would scoff, watching me edit my latest post. But the numbers told a different story. The subscribers, the views, the comments, they were real, tangible. They were mine. Maybe to you, Maria. But to me, and to thousands out there, it's anything but a waste," I'd reply, my confidence unshaken. Marco's restaurant troubles added another layer to our already complicated life. He came to me one day, his pride barely holding back his desperation. "Cora, the restaurant, it's struggling. I need help. Would you lend me some money? Just to tide things over?" His vulnerability was a rare sight, and it tugged at my heartstrings. "Of course, Marco. I'll help. But this isn't just a loan, it's an investment. In us, in our family." His relief was palpable, but it was tinged with the unspoken truth. I was the lifeline, the silent savior of the family facade. And as I transferred $10,000, as I watched the gratitude and the guilt in his eyes, I knew the balance had shifted. Time in that house felt like a ticking bomb, and each day brought us closer to the explosion. Sophia's marriage brought her husband, Rick, into an already cramped space. His presence only added to the chaos and tension that had become a constant in the house. "You two just take up space," Maria would sneer, her words cutting through the crowded living room. "You're nothing but freeloaders, Cora. You and that kid." I clenched my teeth, hugging Luca closer. "We're family, Maria. Or at least, that's what a house like this is supposed to mean." But when Sophia announced her pregnancy, Maria's attitude shifted into something even harsher, more direct. "This house is getting crowded, Cora. And frankly, you and your boy are just in the way." The words stung, but before I could muster a response, Marco dropped a bombshell of his own at dinner. "I have to go out of town for a few weeks. Restaurant business," he said, avoiding my gaze. A few weeks in this madhouse without even the slightest buffer Marco provided felt like a sentence I couldn't bear. "You're leaving? Now? With everything going on?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper over the lump in my throat. He didn't meet my eyes. "I have to, Cora. It's important." And just like that, he was gone. The door shut behind him, and the weight of his absence settled over the house like a thick fog. I tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy for Luca. We went for our walks, did our workouts in the park, anything to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the house. But when we returned from kindergarten one day, the sight that greeted us froze me in my tracks. Our belongings, bags, suitcases, Luca's toys, were piled up outside the front door like garbage. "Mommy, what's happening?" Luca's small voice was laced with confusion and fear. I swallowed hard, fighting back the tears as I approached the door. "Maria, Sophia, what is this? Why are our things outside?" I demanded, my voice shaking with anger and disbelief. The response came cold and merciless from the other side of the door. "You heard me, Cora. The house is too crowded, and you two are just taking up space. It's time for you to leave. Find somewhere else to call home." Maria's voice was like a knife, and Sophia's echoing laughter only twisted it deeper. I stood there, my whole world collapsing around me. And what should I tell Marco? What will you say to your son when he asks where his wife and child are? Their laughter was the only answer I got. It was clear, in their eyes, we were expendable, an inconvenience easily discarded. With a heavy heart and a mind swirling with shock and betrayal, I gathered our belongings. Holding Luca's hand tightly, I stepped away from the house that was never a home. The pain was sharp, the betrayal bitter, but it was the clarity of the moment that struck me the most. This was the end of one chapter, a chapter of struggle and pain. But it was also the beginning of something new, something ours. I rented an apartment, a small but safe haven for me and Luca. As I unpacked our lives, the reality of what had happened, of what I had escaped, began to sink in. I was alone, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope, a sense of freedom. Settling into the new apartment was a bittersweet experience. It was a safe haven for me and Luca, a place where the shadows of Maria's house couldn't reach us. I was meticulously arranging our belongings, trying to make the space feel like home, when my phone buzzed with a message that sent shockwaves through my world. It was from Sophia, her message laced with a sickening glee. "You think you know Marco? Think again, Cora. Attached was a link, a portal to a truth I had never imagined. Trembling, I clicked the link. The screen lit up with images that shattered my reality. There was Marco, not buried in restaurant woes, but in the arms of another woman. Their intimacy was undeniable, the photos a stark contrast to the lies he'd fed me. The most recent ones were dated just yesterday. The business trip, the stress he'd mentioned, it was all a facade, a cruel play where I was the unwitting financier. I felt numb, the pain and betrayal intertwining into a cold resolve. For years, I had been the backbone, the silent benefactor of a man who lived a double life, all while his family treated me like dirt. A week of turbulent emotions was broken by incessant calls from Marco. His voice, once a comfort, was now a trigger for my contempt. Cora, please, you need to come back. Mom and Sophia crossed a line. And the restaurant, it's in shambles. I need you, Cora. The bills, they're piling up. The pleas that would have once pulled at my heartstrings, now evoked nothing but disdain. So you only need me to pay your bills and your family's bills? His voice cracked, desperation seeping through. We're still a family. You, me, Luca. Isn't that worth fighting for? A bitter laugh escaped me. A family? Is that what you call this charade? No, Marco. We're far from a family. And as for your restaurant, your debts? They're yours to deal with. Silence filled the line, heavy and uncomfortable. I could almost feel the weight of his predicament pressing down on him. But Cora, the money, Your problem, Marco. Your restaurant, your money. I'm done being your lifeline. I cut in, my voice unwavering, strong. However, we will discuss all this tomorrow. I will come to your mother's house. I made my decision. I'd return to that house, not as the broken woman they expected, but as the force they never saw coming. I'd face them, face Marco, Maria, and Sophia, armed with the truth and a plan that would turn their world upside down. Stepping into the house was like entering a lion's den. Marco's face lit up with a mix of hope and surprise, but Maria and Sophia's expressions were as cold as ice. They clearly weren't thrilled about my return. Look who's back, Maria said, her tone dripping with disdain. Missed us, have you? I met her gaze, without flinching. Not at all, Maria. I'm here for something important. I handed Marco the envelope, his face turning pale as he recognized it for what it was. Divorce papers, Marco, I stated, the words tasting of freedom. Our marriage ends here. Maria and Sophia's initial shock quickly morphed into smiles. Finally getting rid of the dead weight, Marco? Sophia jeered, her laughter grating on my nerves. But their joy was premature. Don't get too excited, I interjected sharply. You might want to sit down for this. It's been me, not Marco, keeping this household afloat. The room fell into stunned silence. Marco's eyes darted between me and his family, the truth finally out in the open. It's true, he admitted, his voice barely audible. The restaurant's been failing. Cora's been covering everything. She transferred $4,000 to me every month. Maria and Sophia turned on him, their faces twisted with anger and disbelief. You lied to us? You let her pay our bills? Maria's voice was shrill. What should we do now, without her money? Then, Marco continued, his desperation clear. I'm going to file for alimony. I earn less, so it's only fair. His mother and sister were delighted with this decision and even clapped their hands. Their claps echoed hollowly in the room, but I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity. You think that's going to work, Marco? You won't get a cent from me. Especially not after I found out about your affair. The color drained from his face. How did you? He stammered, his false bravado crumbling. I pointedly looked at Sophia. Your sister was kind enough to send me all the proof I needed. The argument that erupted was fierce, the house filled with accusations and betrayals laid bare. Marco and Sophia were shouting at each other, waving their arms. Amid the chaos, I remained calm, my next move clear. I'm taking back what's mine, I declared, my voice cutting through the noise. Every appliance, every piece of furniture I paid for. You're left with what you've earned, which is nothing. And that's exactly what I did. I stripped the house of every trace of my financial support, leaving them to face the consequences of their actions. Maria's and Sophia's pleas for mercy, for forgiveness, were ignored. I blocked their numbers, severing the last ties to a life of deceit and disrespect. The fallout was swift. Marco's restaurant crumbled under the weight of debt, the house was lost, and Sophia's husband walked away from the wreckage of their family. They were left with nothing but each other and their mistakes in a cramped rented apartment. As for me, Luca and I flourished in our new life. Our days were filled with love, laughter, and the peace we'd fought so hard to find. The past was behind us, a distant memory overshadowed by the bright future we were building together. We were more than survivors, we were conquerors, and our story was just beginning. Managing a hotel wasn't just a job for me, it was my life. I'm Grace, and this hotel was my world until he walked in. He was impossible to miss, a young man in a suit that screamed money, his attention glued to an expensive phone. He checked in with a smile that could knock you off your feet. "Good evening, I'm Ethan," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "I'm here for a couple of nights. Anything interesting happening around here?" I found myself smiling back, a bit caught off guard by his charm. "Well, Ethan, the city's full of surprises." "Depends on what you're looking for," I replied, handing him his key. Our chat was brief, but it sparked something. Maybe it was his curiosity, or the way he seemed genuinely interested when I spoke. He didn't stay long, but when he checked out, he left a note. "Enjoyed our talk. Care to continue it over dinner?" It read. I hesitated, not used to mixing work with my personal life. But something about him drew me in. We met at a local restaurant, a cozy place where the chatter and clinking glasses made it feel like a bubble away from the world. "You really have this place dialed in, don't you, Grace?" he said with a smile as we sat down. I laughed, feeling oddly at ease. "Guess you could say I've had some practice." Dinner flew by as we talked about everything and nothing. He was an open book, or so it seemed, sharing tales of his travels and investments. When the conversation turned to me, I found myself opening up more than I usually would. I told him about losing my parents, about how it was just Mia and me against the world since I was 21. "That's a heavy load to carry, Grace. You must be incredibly strong," he said, his eyes reflecting a mix of admiration and something else I couldn't quite place. I shrugged, brushing off the compliment. "We all play the hand we're dealt, right? Mia's been my priority. Our parents left us a little something, and I've been careful with it. Made it grow, bit by bit." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's impressive. You've got a good head on your shoulders." As the night wore on, I realized I hadn't laughed this much in a long time. But when I tried to learn more about him, about his family, he'd skillfully changed the subject. "My folks and I don't see eye to eye. Let's just say they have their ideas about life, and I have mine," he said, a shadow crossing his face. I didn't press further. We all have our stories, our scars. As the evening drew to a close, I found myself not wanting it to end. There was something about Ethan, something that made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. My life with Ethan felt like a whirlwind, each day a new adventure, every moment spent together filled with laughter and dreams of the future. He had this way of making the ordinary seem extraordinary, turning simple dinners into unforgettable evenings. "Ethan, I still can't believe how fast everything is moving," I said to him one evening as we sat in our favorite little cafe, the one with the dim lights and cozy corners. He reached across the table, taking my hand in his. "Grace, when something feels right, why wait? I've never been surer of anything in my life," he replied, his eyes holding mine with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. "I know, it's just, everything's happening so fast. It's a lot to take in," I confessed, feeling a whirlpool of emotions swirling inside me. He squeezed my hand gently. I get it, but trust me, Grace. I'm here for the long haul. I want to build a life with you, a future. And I want to start by making our wedding day the most memorable day of our lives. The way he spoke about our wedding, with such passion and certainty, it was hard not to get caught up in his vision. He painted a picture of a day so lavish and beautiful it took my breath away. Imagine it, Grace. A ceremony that no one will forget, a celebration of our love. It's going to be perfect, he said, his voice filled with excitement. And the honeymoon? You mentioned something about the most expensive hotel in the world? I asked, a mix of curiosity and apprehension in my voice. His smile widened. Yes, it's all part of the plan. But I need you to trust me, to take this leap with me. Your savings for the wedding, my funds for the honeymoon and our future home. Together, we'll make this a reality. I hesitated, the practical part of me screaming caution. But looking into his eyes, full of love and promise, I found myself nodding. Okay, Ethan. Let's do it. Let's make this wedding a day to remember. As the weeks flew by, the wedding preparations became all-consuming. Ethan was a man of action, taking care of every detail, ensuring that our day would be nothing short of spectacular. And as I watched him, so full of life and determination, I couldn't help but fall even deeper in love. Ethan, you're amazing. The way you're handling everything, I don't know how to thank you, I said to him one evening, as we reviewed the list of guests and the lavish menu he'd planned. He pulled me close, his arms wrapping around me. Grace, seeing you happy is all the thanks I need. This wedding, it's just the beginning. Our life together is going to be even more beautiful. But amidst the whirl of excitement, there were moments when doubt crept in, whispering questions in the quiet of the night. Was I moving too fast? Was I getting swept away by the romance of it all? Every time those thoughts surfaced, Ethan's assurances were there to chase them away. His words, his promises, they were my anchor, holding me steady in the storm of uncertainty. The wedding prep had my days packed, but amidst the whirl of cake tastings and flower selections, I knew I needed Mia, my sister, my confidant, by my side. Since our parents passed, it had been us against the world, and her input meant everything to me, especially now. I called her up, hoping she could sneak away from the cafe she worked at. Hey, Mia, think you can ditch the aprons and coffee smells for some tulle and satin today? I half joked, my voice laced with hopeful anticipation. Mia's laughter came through the phone, light and familiar. For you, sis, I'll trade coffee stains for bridal trains any day. Give me an hour to wrap things up here, and I'm all yours. The bridal shop was a wonderland of white and ivory, dresses cascading like waterfalls of lace and silk. As I tried on gowns, Mia's presence was a calming force in the storm of satin and sequins. That one, Grace. It's like it was made for you, Mia said, her eyes lighting up as I stepped out of the dressing room in a gown that felt just right. I studied my reflection, the dress hugging every curve and cascading to the floor in a sea of soft fabric. You think? I feel. I don't know, like a real bride, I admitted, a smile creeping onto my lips. Mia's grin matched mine, but in a fleeting moment, I caught a shadow pass over her face, quick and troubling. Before I could question it, she was up and pulling a dress off the rack. Mind if I give this one a whirl? Just for kicks, Mia said, holding up a stunning gown that caught the light with every movement. I laughed, the sound a mix of surprise and delight. Planning on eloping, are you? Or is there a mystery man you've been hiding from me? Mia's laugh, usually so carefree, held a note of something I couldn't quite place. Oh, Grace, you know me. Always a bridesmaid, never a bride. But a girl can dream, can't she? She quipped, though her gaze darted away, hiding something. The day rolled on, a blend of laughter and whispers of silk. But Mia's mood seemed to flip like a switch, her usual bubbly demeanor clouded by moments of distraction. Everything okay, Mia? You seem a bit off today. I probed gently, concern threading through my words. She was quick to dismiss it, a wave of her hand erasing my worries. It's nothing, really. Just cafe chaos. You know how it gets, Mia assured me, but her forced smile didn't quite reach her eyes. As we left the bridal shop, the weight of her secrets seemed to hang between us, an unspoken tension that neither of us could quite navigate. I wanted to believe it was just pre-wedding stress, maybe a spat with a troublesome customer, but the nagging in my gut told me it was something more. That night, as I lay in bed, the excitement of finding the perfect dress was overshadowed by the puzzle that was Mia's behavior. She was the one person who had always been an open book to me, yet now, there were pages I couldn't read, words hidden just out of sight. And as the wedding day edged closer, the joy I should have been feeling was tinged with a worry I couldn't shake. Mia and I had faced everything together, but now, it felt like there was a growing gap, one filled with secrets and unasked questions. Little did I know, the answers to those questions were about to turn my world on its head. It was a day like any other, or so I thought, until Ethan left his phone buzzing and forgotten on the kitchen counter. As I went about tidying up the apartment, the constant notifications from his phone nagged at me, a persistent reminder of something amiss. The lack of a password was a surprise, but it was nothing compared to the shock that awaited me inside. The messages between Ethan and Mia were like a punch to the gut, each word a betrayal that tore through my heart. They weren't just having an affair, they were planning to push me aside like I was nothing, like all the years of sisterhood with Mia meant less than the dirt under their shoes. I read and reread Mia's message, confessing her pregnancy with Ethan's child. The words blurred as tears clouded my vision. Can't believe we pulled this off. She's such a fool, falling for every lie. And now, with the baby, we can finally be together, just as we planned, it read. The world around me seemed to spin, a carousel of deceit and treachery. Ethan's reply was no better, declaring his love for Mia and his eagerness to see me humiliated, ousted from my own wedding. She's just a naive cash cow. Can't wait to get rid of her and start our real life together. This wedding will be perfect, thanks to her money, he wrote. I sat there, the phone heavy in my hand, a storm of emotions raging within me. Betrayal, anger, disbelief, they all fought for dominance, but above all, a cold determination began to take root. They thought they could use me, discard me like an old toy? I'd show them the price of underestimating Grace Anderson. When Ethan returned, his carefree demeanor was like a slap in the face. Hey, babe, did I miss any important calls? He asked, casually picking up his phone. I forced a smile, my insides churning with anger. Nope, just the usual stuff. Busy day? I replied, my voice steady, despite the turmoil within. He flashed that charming smile, the one I now knew was nothing but a mask. As always. But nothing's more important than coming back to you, he said, leaning in for a kiss I had to force myself not to recoil from. From that moment on, I played the part of the oblivious fiancé to perfection. I smiled, I nodded, I went along with the wedding plans. But behind the scenes, I was planning my revenge on the two people who had betrayed me in the worst possible way. Each passing day was a test of my will, a balancing act between the role I had to play and the fury that burned within. But I wouldn't let them see me break. I'd bide my time, and when the moment was right, they'd learn the true cost of their treachery. And as I lay in bed each night, the image of Ethan and Mia's deceitful faces etched into my mind, I made a silent vow. They would pay for what they'd done, and their twisted game would be their undoing. I was no longer just the jilted fiancé, I was the architect of their downfall, and my revenge would be meticulous, calculated, and oh so sweet. The days leading up to the wedding felt surreal. On the surface, everything was perfect, the flowers, the guest list, the dress. But beneath the facade of perfection was a storm brewing, a tempest of anger and betrayal that I held tightly within. Ethan was his usual self, all smiles and affection, blissfully unaware of the storm he was about to sail into. Grace, everything's coming together so beautifully. This wedding is going to be the talk of the town, he said one evening, as we reviewed the final preparations. I nodded, my smile practiced and polished. Yes, it's going to be a day to remember, I replied, the words laced with a meaning he couldn't possibly grasp. Mia was harder to face. The sister I had loved and protected was now a stranger, her every word and gesture a reminder of her betrayal. Yet, I kept my mask firmly in place, the mask of the loving sister, blissfully ignorant of the knife she had planted in my back. Grace, you're handling everything so well. I don't know how you do it, Mia said one day, as we finalized the seating arrangements. I looked at her, the sister I thought I knew, and forced a laugh. Oh, Mia, you know me. Always had a knack for organizing chaos, I said, the irony of the statement not lost on me. As the wedding day drew closer, the tension became almost tangible, a tightrope I walked with precision and care. Ethan's phone was now always guarded, his conversations hushed and hurried. But it didn't matter. I had seen enough, knew enough. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, a beautiful day for a beautiful disaster. As I got ready, the reflection in the mirror showed a bride, serene and poised. But behind the veil and the makeup was a woman on a mission, a woman who would no longer be a pawn in someone else's game. Mia's running late, huh? Ethan remarked casually, adjusting his tie. I met his gaze in the mirror, my eyes giving nothing away. Yes, but she'll be here. Wouldn't miss it for the world, I replied, the double meaning clear in my voice. He nodded, oblivious to the undercurrents. Well, she's always been a bit unpredictable. But today's about us, Grace. Our new beginning. I turned to face him, my smile a masterpiece of composure. Yes, Ethan. A new beginning indeed, I said, my heart steeling itself for what was about to come. And as I walked down the aisle, the eyes of friends and family on me, I knew that this was it. The calm before the storm was over, and the reckoning was about to begin. The vows were waiting, the guests were watching, and the stage was set. It was time for the truth to come crashing down, and for the real show to begin. Standing next to Ethan in front of the priest, my heart was a mix of hope and trepidation. The words of the vows hovered in the air, a promise of forever that was about to be shattered in the most brutal way. The guests, unaware of the storm about to break, watched us with smiles and teary eyes. But then, the unimaginable happened. Mia, dressed in a bridal gown that mirrored my own, stormed down the aisle. Her eyes locked on mine, not with sisterly love, but with a cold determination that chilled me to the bone. Move aside, Grace. I'm the one who deserves to be here. Ethan loves me, and this child I'm carrying is his, Mia declared, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. The room erupted into whispers and gasps, the guests turning to each other in confusion and disbelief. Ethan, rather than showing any sign of shock or remorse, let out a hearty laugh, his true colors shining through the polished facade. Well said, Mia. Grace, you've been a good host, but this is where your part ends. Why don't you join the audience? This is Mia's moment now, Ethan jeered, his words dripping with mockery and contempt. The audacity of their betrayal, so public and so cruel, sent a shockwave through the crowd. But as the reality of the situation sank in, my reaction surprised everyone, including myself. I looked at Ethan, then at Mia, and smiled. Of course, why not? I wouldn't want to miss the show. After all, I did pay for it, I said, my voice calm, betraying none of the turmoil inside me. Mia and Ethan exchanged a confused glance, clearly not expecting such a composed response. The guests, too, were baffled, their eyes darting between us, trying to make sense of the surreal scene unfolding before them. As I gracefully took a seat among the guests, my head held high, the whispers grew louder. What's she up to? Is she really going to let this happen? The questions buzzed around the room like a swarm of bees, but I remained serene, a statue amidst the chaos. Ethan and Mia, now standing together at the altar, looked unnerved. My calm demeanor had thrown them off, their plan to humiliate and discard me not unfolding as they had anticipated. "What's your game, Grace? Why are you so calm?" Ethan asked, his voice a mix of curiosity and concern. I met his gaze, my smile never wavering. "No game, Ethan. Just enjoying the fruits of my labor. Please, proceed. I'm eager to see how this plays out," I replied, my words a velvet-covered dagger. The ceremony resumed, but the atmosphere had shifted. The guests watched in a mix of shock and anticipation, unsure whether they were witnessing a wedding or the prelude to a dramatic reckoning. As Mia and Ethan exchanged vows, the words felt hollow, a mockery of the sacred promise they were supposed to represent. And as I sat there, surrounded by friends and family who were struggling to comprehend the spectacle, I knew that this was just the beginning. The real show was yet to come, and Mia and Ethan, in their arrogance and deceit, had just secured front-row seats to their own downfall. As the priest asked if anyone objected, the doors burst open. A woman, older and more worn than either Ethan, stormed in, her eyes blazing with fury. "Stop this wedding right now," she demanded, her voice slicing through the silence like a knife. Ethan's face turned ashen, his eyes wide with shock. "Catherine? What are you doing here?" he stammered, the mask of the perfect groom slipping away. Catherine, Ethan's legal wife, as I had discovered, marched up to the altar. "I'm here to stop you from making a bigger fool of yourself and these people. Grace, you deserve to know the truth," she said, turning to me with a sympathetic look. The guests murmured among themselves, the scandal unfolding before them more gripping than any soap opera. Mia clutched her stomach, her face a mask of shock and fear. Catherine continued, her voice firm and clear. "Ethan is a liar and a cheat. He's in debt up to his ears, his investments failed, and he's been using you all to dig himself out of his hole. And Mia, you poor girl, you're just another pawn in his game." The room erupted into chaos, the guests rising from their seats, the whispers growing louder. Ethan tried to speak, but his words were drowned out by the uproar. I stood up, my heart pounding, but my voice steady. "There's more," I announced, silencing the room. "I hired a private detective after I discovered Ethan and Mia's affair. Not only is Ethan already married and drowning in debt, but he's also been hiding a daughter, a child he's never supported." Mia's face crumpled, the reality of her situation crashing down around her. "Ethan, is this true? Tell me she's lying," she pleaded, her voice breaking. Ethan, now pale and defeated, had no words. His lies, his deceit, all laid bare for the world to see. But the final blow was yet to come. As the guests processed the revelations, Ethan's parents, two stern and imposing figures, entered the room. I had reached out to them, told them everything. And now, they were here to confront the son who had brought shame to their name. Ethan's father, a man of few words, spoke with a voice that resonated with disappointment and anger. "Ethan, you are no son of mine. Your actions today and in the past have shown your true character. You are cut off from our family and our fortune." As the room settled into an uneasy silence, I looked at Ethan, Mia, and the shattered dreams they had tried to build on a foundation of deceit. The pain of betrayal still throbbed in my heart, but standing there, amidst the ruins of what was meant to be my happiest day, I knew that this was not the end of my story. In the aftermath, I found myself in the cold halls of justice, seeking reparation for the damage Ethan had caused. The courtroom felt like another world, a place where the pain and humiliation I had endured were translated into legal jargon and paperwork. "Ethan, you've not only broken a promise, but you've also shattered trust and exploited generosity. You owe me more than just an apology. You owe me compensation for turning my life upside down," I stated firmly, my voice echoing in the quiet courtroom. The judge's gavel sounded like thunder in the tense silence. "The court finds in favor of the plaintiff. The defendant is hereby ordered to pay $50,000 in damages for the distress and financial loss caused," he declared, his words a balm to my wounded spirit. As I walked out of the courtroom, the burden of the past months felt lighter. Justice had been served, but the road to healing was just beginning. Ethan's troubles didn't end with me. Catherine, his legal wife, fueled by hurt and fury, launched her own legal battle, demanding compensation for his infidelity and neglect of their child. The once suave and confident man was now entangled in a web of his own making, his lies and deceit finally catching up to him. Mia, my sister, the person I had trusted and loved more than anyone, found herself alone and abandoned. Ethan had fled the city, leaving her to face the consequences of their actions. She was pregnant and scared, a far cry from the carefree and happy girl she once was. Grace, I know I don't have the right to ask for your forgiveness. But I'm lost, and I don't know what to do, Mia pleaded one day, her eyes filled with tears. I looked at her, the sister I once would have done anything for. Mia, you were my family, my blood. But what you did, it's not something I can just forget or forgive. You chose your path, and now you have to walk it, just like I'm walking mine. The distance between us was more than just physical. It was a chasm filled with betrayal and hurt, too wide and too deep to ever bridge again. Life moved on, but the scars of those tumultuous months remained. I focused on rebuilding my life, on finding peace in the simple things. I had loved and lost, trusted and been betrayed, but through it all, I had survived. And as I looked back on everything that had happened, I realized that the most important journey was the one I was taking within myself. A journey of healing, of rediscovering my strength, and of learning to trust and love again.
My name's Carol, just a regular high school teacher with a love for old books and a quiet life. My world changed when I met David at the school fair. He was the main sponsor, you know, the kind of guy who makes things happen without making a fuss about it. He had that quiet confidence and a smile that could light up the gloomiest day. It started with a thank you note I sent him for his generous contribution. He replied with invitation for coffee, saying it was the least he could do for the hard work we teachers were putting in. I remember walking into that coffee shop, my heart racing a bit, thinking, Carol, it's just coffee, not a moon landing. David was easy to talk to. We chatted about everything, from books to the best pizza in town. He had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. Before we knew it, coffee turned into dinner, and dinners turned into weekends together. A few months in, he wanted me to meet his mother, Mrs. Winters. She's a bit old school, but she'll love you, he said. I was a bundle of nerves, wanting to make a good impression. I picked out my nicest dress and spent more time on my hair than I'd like to admit. The moment we walked into Mrs. Winters' living room, I felt her eyes on me like a hawk. So, you're the teacher David won't stop talking about, she said, her voice colder than I expected. I smiled, reached out for a handshake, but she just nodded, her eyes scanning me from head to toe. Dinner was an experience. Mrs. Winters had this way of talking where every compliment sounded like she was doing you a favor. That's an interesting dress, dear. Vintage shop? She said, her eyebrow raised just so. I felt my cheeks burn, but I managed a small thank you. It's one of my favorites. David squeezed my hand under the table, a silent hang in there, but the digs kept coming. A teacher, huh? Must be tough dealing with kids all day. Hope you don't bring that school discipline home. She chuckled, sipping her wine like it was the last one on earth. I tried, really tried, to keep the conversation light, but it was like dancing on thin ice. David changed the topic, talked about his work, the weather, anything to steer away from the silent judgments being passed across the table. Fast forward a few months, and there I was, in a white dress, saying "I-do" to the man who made it all worth it. The wedding was a blur of laughter, tears, and dancing. Mrs. Winters was there, of course, dressed to the nines and handing out opinions like candy. Lovely ceremony, though I'd have gone for real flowers. Not these. What are these, dear plastic? She said, eyeing the decorations. We moved into David's home soon after. It was a beautiful place, cozy and welcoming, except for the chill I felt whenever Mrs. Winters was around. David assured me it would get better, that she just needed time to get used to me. Moving into David's home felt like stepping into a new world, one where every corner held a memory of Mrs. Winters' reign. It wasn't long before I got introduced to her morning ritual, the infamous inspection. It started like clockwork every morning. The minute the clock struck 10, the front door would creak open, and in she'd walk like the queen of her castle. Mrs. Winters had this air about her, you know, like she owned every inch of the place. Her first move was always to slip on those pristine white gloves, snapping them tight like she was about to perform surgery. "Morning, Carol dear," she'd say, her voice dripping with a sweetness that never reached her eyes. "Just here to help you keep the place up to David's standards." I'd force a smile, my hands clenching the dish towel a bit too tight. "Thanks, Mrs. Winters, but I've got it covered." She'd tut and shake her head, already walking towards the living room. "Nonsense, dear. You're new to this. It takes a keen eye to keep a house like this." And then it'd begin. She'd glide from room to room, that white handkerchief in her hand sweeping over every surface. It was like watching some twisted ballet, her movements precise, calculated. "You see here, dear," she'd say, holding up the handkerchief, now with a faint smudge of dust. "This is what I'm talking about. Can't have David living in a dustbin, can we?" I bit my tongue, the words, "It's not a dustbin," sitting at the tip, but I swallowed them down. David had asked me to play nice, and I was trying, really trying. The worst was the kitchen. That's my territory, you know. I love cooking, always have. But she'd march in there like a general, inspecting the troops. "These pots aren't going to clean themselves, dear," she'd cluck, her fingers running over the rim of a saucepan I'd just washed. "It's clean, Mrs. Winters, I'd insist," my voice steady despite the storm inside. She'd hum, a sound that said, "I've heard better jokes." Well, we have different standards, I suppose. David's used to a certain way, you see. I'd nod, grinding my teeth so hard I was afraid I'd chip a tooth. It was the same every day. The living room, the bedrooms, even the bathrooms weren't spared. By the time she'd leave, I'd feel like a deflated balloon, all my energy sapped by her constant nitpicking. David would come home, all smiles and hugs, and I'd put on a brave face. "How was your day, love?" He'd ask, and I'd muster the brightest smile I could. "Oh, you know, the usual." Mrs. Winters stopped by to give some helpful tips, I'd say, the word helpful taking all my acting skills to sound even remotely sincere. He'd frown, that wrinkle appearing between his brows. "I'll talk to her, Carol. She means, well, she just has her way, you know." I knew. Oh, how I knew. But what I didn't know was how long I could play this game, smiling through the inspections, biting back the words that screamed inside me. Saturday mornings should have been about lazy breakfasts and staying in pajamas till noon. But in our house, they were about one thing, the dreaded family dinner. It wasn't just any dinner. It was the weekly performance, with Mrs. Winters as the stern judge and me. Well, I was the hopeful contestant, always falling short. I'd be up at the crack of dawn, the kitchen my battlefield. Pots and pans clanged, the oven roared, and spices danced in the air. It was my attempt, week after week, to impress the unimpressible, Mrs. Winters. David, bless his heart, would stumble in half awake. "Need any help, love?" he'd ask, rubbing sleep from his eyes. I'd shoo him away with a spoon covered in sauce. "Go get ready. Your mom will be here any minute, and you know how she is about punctuality." He'd chuckle, a sound that held a mix of love and a hint of worry. "Yeah, if you're on time, you're late, that's her motto." The clock hadn't even struck 6 when we'd hear the sharp rap on the door. Showtime. Mrs. Winters and Mr. Winters would step in, him with his warm smile, her with her eyes already scanning for faults. "Smells good in here, Carol. What's on the menu today?" Mr. Winters would always start off with a compliment, his genuine kindness a stark contrast to his wife. Before I could answer, Mrs. Winters would chime in, her voice slicing through the warmth. "I hope it's not that casserole from last time. Remember, David, how you had that stomachache?" David would wince, a silent plea in his eyes, begging me not to retort. "Mom, Carol's been working hard all day. Let's just enjoy the meal, yeah?" Dinner would be a tense affair. Mr. Winters would heap praises, his delicious "dear," and "you've outdone yourself, Carol," battling against Mrs. Winters's relentless critique. "This chicken is dry, dear. You really must learn to keep an eye on the oven," she'd say, pushing her barely touched plate away. I'd grit my teeth, forcing a polite, "I'll remember that for next time, Mrs. Winters." David would try to lighten the mood, his jokes a desperate attempt to bridge the widening gap at the table, but it was like throwing pebbles into a chasm, hoping for a bridge. And then, just when I thought I'd survived the worst, dessert would come, and with it, a fresh wave of critiques. "Is this pie supposed to be this? Crunchy?" Mrs. Winters would ask, the word crunchy sounding more like catastrophics. I'd swallow the lump in my throat, my reply a mix of wariness and defiance. "It's a family recipe, Mrs. Winters. It's always a hit." She'd raise an eyebrow, her gaze saying clearer than words, "Not in this family, dear." As they'd leave, Mr. Winters would give me a warm, encouraging hug, whispering, "Don't mind her, Carol. We all love your cooking." But Mrs. Winters' parting words would always be a reminder of the invisible scoreboard where I was always trailing. "Try harder next time, dear. A happy husband is a well-fed husband." The door would close behind them, and I'd stand there, a mix of frustration and defeat simmering inside. David would wrap his arms around me, his silence a mix of apology and solidarity. "It's just one night a week, love. We'll get through this," he'd whisper, his words a lifebuoy in the stormy seas of Saturday dinners. The news of the pregnancy should have been a moment of pure joy, a new chapter for David and me. But amidst the excitement, a shadow lingered, the thought of Mrs. Winters' reaction. David was over the moon, grinning ear to ear. "We're going to be parents. Carol, can you believe it?" he'd say, wrapping me in a hug so tight it felt like nothing could go wrong. But the first time Mrs. Winters dropped by after hearing the news, the air was thick with tension. I braced myself for her words, hoping maybe, just maybe, this new life might soften her. "Well, I do hope you've read up on parenting, Carol. It's not all cooing and cuddling, you know," she started, her tone as sharp as ever. I bit back a sigh, a fake smile plastered on. "We're thrilled, Mrs. Winters. And yes, we're reading a lot, getting ready for the baby." She sniffed, peering at me like she was assessing if I was up to the task. Well, make sure you follow the right books. Some of these modern ideas are just nonsense." David squeezed my hand under the table, a silent message of support. But as the weeks turned into months, the pressure didn't ease. Mrs. Winters' visits became a litany of advice and thinly veiled criticism. "You're not eating enough greens, Carol. You want the baby to be healthy, don't you?" she'd say, eyeing my plate like it was a crime scene. Or, "Make sure you're not being too lazy. Exercise is important, but don't overdo it. You wouldn't want to harm the baby." It was a no-win situation. Do too little and I was careless. Do too much and I was reckless. The breaking point came one quiet afternoon. Mrs. Winters had just left. Her parting words, "Make sure the nursery is painted soon. You don't want the baby coming home to an unready house," ringing in my ears. David found me in the nursery, the paint samples scatter around, tears streaming down my face. "Carol, what's wrong? Talk to me, love," he said, his voice laced with worry. I let it all out, the frustration, the hurt, the exhaustion. "I can't do this anymore, David. It's like I'm walking on eggshells in my own home, your mother. It's just too much." David's face hardened, a rare sight. "I'll talk to her, Carol. This ends now. You and the baby are my priority." And he did. That evening, I heard hushed, tense voices from the living room. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear. David was setting boundaries, fighting for our little family. The next day, Mrs. Winters' visits stopped. No more morning inspections, no more veiled insults. It was a relief, yet the silence felt heavy, charged with unsaid words and unresolved tensions. David was quieter too, his smiles not reaching his eyes. "She's my mom, Carol. It hurts, but you and the baby come first." "Always?" I held him close, the future uncertain but our resolve clear. We were a team, and we'd face whatever came next, together. 7 years flew by since Lily, our little bundle of joy, came into our world. David was a doting father, his love for Lily shining in his every action. My father-in-law, a gentle soul, adored his granddaughter, his face lighting up with every giggle and every new word Lily spoke. But there was a chill that never thawed, a coldness that lingered in the air whenever Mrs. Winters was around. She kept her distance from Lily, her words as sharp as ever. "Children should be seen and not heard," she'd say, dismissing Lily's cheerful chatter as nothing more than noise. Lily, with her big heart and innocent eyes, couldn't understand why her grandma wasn't like the ones in her storybooks. She'd try, in her own sweet way, to win over Mrs. Winters. "Look, Grandma, I drew this for you," she'd say, holding up a crayon masterpiece. Mrs. Winters would barely glance at it, her voice devoid of warmth. "That's nice, dear. Now go play. Grandma's busy." But Lily never lost her spirit. She found her passion early, cooking. The kitchen was her kingdom, her small hands skillfully mixing, stirring, and baking. Every weekend was a new adventure, her culinary creations a source of pride for us. "Look, Daddy, I made cookies," she'd exclaim, her face beaming as she presented her latest work. David would scoop her up, his laughter filling the room. "Chef Lily, you have outdone yourself! These are delicious!" Even my father-in-law couldn't resist Lily's kitchen magic. "My little chef," he'd say, his eyes twinkling as he took a bite, "you'll be running your own restaurant in no time." Their words were a balm to Lily's soul, a stark contrast to the cold indifference she received from Mrs. Winters. But children have a resilience, a way of focusing on the love they receive, not the affection withheld. One evening, as Lily set the table, her latest culinary creation taking center stage, she looked up at me, her eyes serious. "Mom, why doesn't Grandma like my cooking? Doesn't she like food?" I knelt beside her, my heart aching with the innocence of her question. "Sweetheart, Grandma, she's just different. But your cooking is wonderful, and Daddy and Grandpa and I, we love it. That's what matters, right?" Lily nodded, her smile returning, the shadow of Mrs. Winters' indifference brushed aside by the love of those who mattered most. The Christmas invite from Mrs. Winters was a surprise, but Lily's excitement at the chance to showcase her cooking made us accept. Together, we baked gingerbread and apple pie, her little hands working diligently, her eyes sparkling with pride. "Grandma and everyone are gonna love these, right, Mom?" she'd ask, her confidence as warm as the oven. "Absolutely, sweetheart," I'd reassure her, though a part of me dreaded the unpredictable tides of Mrs. Winters' approval. Arriving at the bustling house, we placed our dishes on the grand Christmas table, an array of colors and smells that promised a feast. Lily's face was a picture of joy and anticipation as we mingled, catching up with relatives we hadn't seen in ages. But as we settled at the table, ready to share the meal and the joy of the season, Lily's excitement turned to confusion, then distress. "Mom, where's our gingerbread and pie?" she whispered, her small voice trembling. I scanned the table, a sinking feeling in my stomach. Our dishes were missing. Mrs. Winters at the head of the table was holding court, her laughter ringing out clear and sharp. I approached her, my voice firm but polite. "Mrs. Winters, the dishes Lily and I brought, where are they?" Her laughter cut through the festive hum, cold and piercing. "Oh, those." "I tossed them out, dear. We can't risk serving just anything to our guests, can we?" The room fell silent, the air heavy with shock and disbelief. Lily's eyes filled with tears, her dream of sharing her love through her cooking dashed in an instant. "But I made them for everyone. I worked so hard," she managed to say, her voice a fragile whisper against the weight of her grandmother's harsh words. Mrs. Winters shrugged, her eyes void of any warmth. "Well, dear, not everything made with love is fit for the table. Better safe than sorry." That was the last straw. David, who had always been the bridge between his mother and our family, stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor loudly. "Mom, that's cruel. How could you?" he said, his voice steady, but loaded with an anger I had rarely seen in him. Lily poured her heart into those dishes. She wanted to share something special, and you just threw it away like it was nothing. Mrs. Winters' smile faltered, her eyes widening in surprise. This was not the mild-mannered son she was used to. "David, I was just—" "No, Mom, you went too far. Disrespecting Carol is one thing, but hurting Lily, your own granddaughter, that's something I can't and won't forgive." He interrupted, his disappointment and anger clear and unwavering. The room was still, the festive air replaced by a tense silence. Mrs. Winters sat there, the impact of David's words hitting her. She had expected compliance, maybe a few whispered complaints, but not this. Not her usually gentle son standing up to her, defending his family with such resolve. The air was thick with tension as we left Mrs. Winters' house, the festive lights mocking us with their cheer. The sound of Lily's quiet sobs was louder than the Christmas carols that played in the background. David's hand was firm on my shoulder, a silent pillar of strength. As we reached the door, Mrs. Winters' voice broke through the heavy silence, her tone desperate, a stark contrast to the cold disdain she'd shown earlier. "Please don't go. I'm sorry," she stammered, her eyes wet with tears that seemed out of place on her stern face. David stopped, turning back to face his mother. The room held its breath. "Sorry. Now you're sorry." His voice was low, but it cut through the room, sharp and clear. "You humiliated your own granddaughter, Mom. You broke her heart. There's no sorry that can fix that." Mrs. Winters's sobs grew louder, her composure shattered, but it was too late. The damage was done, and the cracks too deep to mend. In the tense silence that followed, Mr. Winters stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. His voice, when he spoke, was calm, but it carried a weight that silenced the room. "I can't sit here and pretend this is okay, Martha." "Not this time." Without another word, he turned and walked away, his steps heavy with the burden of a decision long overdue. The room felt colder, the festive warmth snuffed out by a single act of unkindness. One by one, the guests stood up, their faces somber, their goodbyes muted and brief. The festive gathering was unraveling, the threads of family and friendship coming undone. As the last guest left, the door closing with a soft click, the magnitude of what had happened settled in the room. Mrs. Winters sat alone at the table, her sobs the only sound in the house that moments ago was filled with laughter and chatter. Outside, the cold air bit at our cheeks, a stark reminder of the warmth we'd left behind. David's arm was around Lily, her small body leaning into his for comfort. We walked in silence, the weight of the night pressing down on us. Back home, as we sat in the living room, the Christmas tree lights twinkling softly, a sense of peace settled over us. It was a fragile peace, one born from the chaos of the night, but it was ours. Lily, nestled between us, her tears dried, but the hurt still fresh in her eyes, looked up and whispered, "Are we okay, Mom, Dad?" David hugged her closer, a silent vow in his embrace. "We're more than okay, sweetheart. We're together, and that's all that matters." And in that moment, as we held each other, the trials of the night receded, leaving behind a simple truth. Family wasn't just about shared blood or shared names. It was about shared love, shared pain, and the shared resolve to stand together when the world seemed to crumble around us. The fallout from that chaotic Christmas dinner rippled through our family like a shockwave. The house felt different, quieter, the air still tinged with the remnants of that night's revelations. David was somber, his usual cheer dimmed by the events that had unfolded. "I'm sorry, Carol," he said one evening as we sat in the living room, the only sound the ticking of the clock. "I should have stood up for you and Lily sooner. I let it go on for too long." I reached for his hand, feeling the roughness of his palm against mine. "You did what you thought was best, David. We both did. But now we know better. We move forward, together." He nodded, the lines on his face softening. But the true shock came the next day when Mr. Winters showed up at our doorstep, his eyes weary, a deep frown creasing his forehead. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. David opened the door wider, concern etched on his face. "Of course, Dad. Is everything okay?" Mr. Winters took a seat, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since Christmas," he started, his voice trailing off. We waited, the tension thick in the air. Finally he looked up, his eyes meeting ours. "I can't believe Martha could be so cruel, so heartless to her own granddaughter. I never imagined she could go that far." David shifted in his seat, the weight of his father's words heavy on his shoulders. "Dad, Mr. Winters raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "No, David, I should have seen it, should have done something sooner. But I didn't, and now I'm thinking about a divorce." The word hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. Divorce wasn't a word thrown around lightly in our family, and coming from Mr. Winters, it was a bombshell. "Divorce!" David echoed, disbelief coloring his tone. Mr. Winters nodded, a resolute look on his face. "I can't be with someone who shows such cruelty, not just to Carol and Lily, but to her own family. I've turned a blind eye for too long, hoping things would change. But after what happened at Christmas, I can't ignore it anymore." We sat in silence, each lost in our thoughts. The decision was monumental, not just for Mr. Winters, but for all of us. It was a line in the sand, a declaration that enough was enough. "Whatever you decide, Dad, "We're here for you," David said, his voice firm. "You've always been there for us, and that won't change." Mr. Winters smiled, a weary, sad smile. "Thank you, son. That means more than you know." In the days that followed, our family found a new rhythm, a new way of being. The shadows of the past lingered, but so did the promise of a fresh start, a chance to build something stronger and more resilient from the broken pieces. Lily's laughter returned, filling the house with a warmth that pushed back the darkness. And as we sat together, the three of us with Mr. Winters now a more frequent visitor, I realized that family wasn't about tolerating the intolerable. It was about standing up for each other, about choosing love and respect over blood and tradition. In the quiet moments, when the night wrapped the world in its embrace, I'd look at my little family and know that, despite the storms we'd weathered, we were stronger together. And no amount of cruelty or coldness could ever change that.
They say life's a journey, and mine sure started on a bumpy road. My folks, Jane and Robert, were the kind that knew the grind all too well. They didn't have much in the way of fancy degrees or fat wallets, but they had hearts of gold and a dream for me bigger than the sky. "Dream big, work hard, Zoya," Dad would say every morning as he tied his worn-out boots, ready for another day at the factory. Mom, with her gentle smile, would pack my lunch, her hands rough from years of juggling odd jobs. I was their golden ticket, their dream of a better life, and they poured every penny they could spare into a jar labeled "Her Future." It wasn't just loose change, it was their sweat, their hope, and their love, all clinking together in that old glass jar. High school was where the rubber met the road. I hit the books hard, determined not to let my folks down. Evenings were a family affair, with Mom quizzing me on my homework and Dad sharing stories about the value of every hard-earned dollar. Then came the letter that changed everything. A thick, fancy envelope with the words "admission confirmed" printed on the front. I'd made it into one of the top colleges to study financial analysis. The joy in our little house was palpable. Mom cried, Dad hugged me so tight I thought I might break, and that night, we had a celebration dinner, nothing fancy, just our favorite stew, but it tasted like victory. College life was a whole new world. I was a small fish in a big pond now, but I wasn't about to float, I was there to swim. To keep afloat financially, I started tutoring. It was during one of these sessions that I met Mike. He was a bit rough around the edges, always had his cap on backward, and seemed more interested in cracking jokes than cracking books. "You know, you'd learn faster if you stopped trying to make me laugh all the time," I chided him during one of our sessions. Mike just grinned, that lopsided grin that I'd soon learn to love. "And you'd be less stressed if you laughed a bit more. Balance, you know?" Our study sessions soon turned into long conversations, laughter, and eventually, something more. He was different from anyone I'd ever met. He had this way of looking at life, unfiltered, unpretentious, just real. But life's not just about the good times, is it? It's about the grind, the hustle, the unending push to keep moving forward. That's what my parents taught me, and that's what I was determined to do, Mike by my side or not. Life after college was like stepping onto a whole new playing field. I landed a gig at a top firm right off the bat. All those nights hitting the books paid off, and I was ready to roll up my sleeves and dive into the world of finance. It was all high rises, sharp suits, and numbers that made your head spin. And let me tell you, it felt good. Real good. Mike, on the other hand, he was treading water. Jobs for him were like buses, you miss one, and you're waiting ages for the next. When he finally landed something, it was clear his paycheck wasn't gonna stack up against mine. At first, it hung in the air like a bad smell. Mike would come home, his pride a little bruised, and I'd be there, trying to lighten the mood. "Hey, it's not about who brings in what," I'd say, slinging an arm around him as we sat down to some takeout after a long day. "We're a team, right?" "Yeah, a team," he'd mumble, but the crease in his brow told me he wasn't buying it. But as time ticked by, we settled into our rhythm. Our love wasn't about who paid for dinner or who had the fancier job title. It was about those quiet nights in, the laughter that filled our tiny apartment, and the dreams we whispered to each other in the dark. We tied the knot one summer's day. Nothing fancy, just a bunch of our closest friends and family, a local band, and a whole lot of love. It felt like the world was ours, and nothing could touch us. Can you believe it? Mrs. and Mr. Mike said, his arm slung around my shoulder as we watched the sun dip below the horizon, the party winding down around us. I leaned into him, feeling the warmth of the moment wrap around us. Believe it? I've been waiting for it, I teased, and we both laughed, the sound mingling with the soft clinking of glasses and the distant murmur of conversations. Life was good, even if it wasn't always easy. We had our share of bumps, like any couple. Bills piled up, and sometimes the end of the month had us digging deep into the couch cushions looking for spare change. But we made it work. Mike's job, well, it wasn't what he dreamt of, but it paid the bills, and he found joy in the little things. Like the way he'd come home, a grin spread across his face, holding some cheap trinket he found at a thrift store, claiming it was a treasure. "Look at this, Zoya," he'd chuckle, holding up a lamp that looked like it had seen better days. "It's got character." I'd roll my eyes, but inside, I loved that about him. He could find the silver lining in a storm cloud. Then there were nights when the weight of it all would press down on us. Nights when Mike would stare out the window, a cold cup of coffee in his hands, his thoughts a million miles away. "You ever think about where we're headed?" he'd ask, his voice barely above a whisper. I'd sit beside him, our shoulders touching, sharing the burden. "All the time. But I know wherever it is, we're headed there together." And he'd nod, the ghost of a smile crossing his lips, and that was enough. It had to be. We were just two kids from the block, trying to make a life together. We had love, we had dreams, and we had each other. And back then, that felt like enough. Stability's a funny thing, you know? One minute you're on top of the world, and the next, it's like the rug's been pulled out from under you. That's what happened to us. My fancy job, the one I thought was rock solid, crumbled like a house of cards. The day it all went down, I remember walking into the office like any other Monday. But the air was different, tense, like a storm was about to hit. And boy, did it hit. The boss called us into the conference room, his face ashen, words stumbling over each other. "Bankruptcy," he said. That one word echoed in my ears, a death knell to all our dreams. I came home that night, my mind a whirlwind of panic and disbelief. Mike was there, sprawled on the couch, a game flickering on the TV. He looked up, saw my face, and immediately knew. "What's wrong, babe?" His voice was calm, but his eyes were searching, worried. I just stood there, the words stuck in my throat. "Job's gone. The company's bankrupt." For a moment, there was just silence, the kind that screams louder than any shout. Then Mike was on his feet, his hands on my shoulders. "Hey, Zoya, look at me. We'll figure this out, okay? You're the smartest person I know. If anyone can bounce back, it's you." But the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Rejection after rejection piled up, each one a reminder of the failure that seemed to cling to my name. The industry was cruel, unforgiving. "We respect your credentials, but..." That but cut deeper each time. Mike did what he could, his paycheck barely enough to keep us afloat. But I saw the strain in his eyes, the way his smile didn't quite reach them anymore. One evening, I found him at the kitchen table, bills spread out like a bad hand of cards. He didn't hear me come in, just kept muttering to himself, numbers and curses tangled up. "Mike?" He looked up, his face drawn, tired. "How did we get here, huh? Used to be we worried about what takeout to get, now it's about which bill can wait till next month." I sat down, took his hand. "We knew life wasn't gonna be a straight road, right? We've hit a bump, a big one, but we'll get over it. Together." Mike shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping him. "Together? Look at us. You're jobless, and I'm barely scraping by. This isn't what we signed up for." His words stung, a slap of reality I wasn't ready for. So what, you're saying I'm not trying? You think I like being stuck here, useless? No, that's not what I mean. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration etched in every line of his face. It's just hard, you know? Feels like no matter how hard I paddle, we're sinking. I wanted to say something, anything, to fix it, to make the hurt in his eyes go away. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, we sat there, together yet miles apart, the weight of our crumbling world pressing down on us. Betrayal, they say, cuts deeper than a knife. It's a wound that festers, a poison that spreads until everything you once held dear is tainted. That's what it felt like when Mike turned on me. It started with snide remarks, little jabs here and there. At first, I tried to brush it off, chalk it up to stress, to the pressure we were both under. But as the days dragged on, those jabs turned into full-blown attacks. Another day, another stack of rejection letters, huh? Mike's voice was harsh, nothing like the warm tones I fell in love with. I looked up from the pile of envelopes on the table, my heart sinking. I'm trying, Mike. You know I am. He snorted, a cold, mocking sound. Trying? What good is trying if it gets us nowhere? You know how much I'm stretching every dollar to keep us afloat here? I felt the sting of his words, the unfairness of it all burning in my chest. You think I don't know that? You think I like sitting here, feeling like a burden? A burden? Well, if the shoe fits. His words were a slap in the face, a confirmation of my worst fears. I stood up, my hands shaking. I can't believe this. After all we've been through, this is how you talk to me? Mike's face was hard, unyielding. Face it, we're sinking and you're just dead weight. I'm done carrying you. That night was the longest of my life. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the echoes of Mike's words haunting the silence. I thought about everything we had been through, all the dreams we had shared. And I realized that the man lying next to me, the man I had built my life with, was a stranger to me now. The final blow came a few days later. I came home to find Mike in the living room, but he wasn't alone. The woman with him was young, too young, with a smirk that made my blood boil. Oh, look who decided to grace us with her presence, Mike sneered as I stood frozen in the doorway. The woman giggled, a high, grating sound. Is this the famous wife? The one who can't hold down a job? I felt the room spin, my heart pounding in my ears. Mike, what is this? Mike stood up, his eyes cold. This is me moving on. I'm done with you, with this sham of a marriage. He threw a stack of papers at me, the word divorce glaring up at me in bold letters. Consider this your eviction notice too. I want you out. I looked from the papers to Mike, to the woman still smirking on the couch. I was numb, the pain too deep, too raw to comprehend. Without a word, I grabbed my coat and my bag, the life I had known slipping through my fingers like sand. Life has a funny way of kicking you when you're down, but it's also got a knack for throwing you a lifeline just when you're about to sink. That's what happened to me the day I wandered into Linda's salon, a place I used to frequent back in my better days. My mind was a mess, my heart in pieces. I must have looked a sight, sitting there on one of those plush chairs, staring blankly at the mirror, seeing a stranger looking back. Linda, with her keen eyes and kind heart, must have seen the storm brewing inside me. She approached, her step soft, her voice gentle. "Honey, you look like you could use a friend," she said, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder. I looked up, met her gaze in the mirror, and before I knew it, the floodgates opened. Words poured out, raw and unfiltered, the story of my downfall, my betrayal, my brokenness. Linda listened, really listened, her nods and soft murmurs a balm to my battered soul. When I finally fell silent, she gave my hand a squeeze. "You know, Zoya," she started, her tone thoughtful, "I've been looking for someone to help me manage this place. Business is good, but it's getting too much for just me to handle." I blinked, her words not quite registering. Me? Manage a salon? But I'm a financial analyst, or at least, I was. I know nothing about running a beauty salon. Linda chuckled, a warm, rich sound. Oh, honey, skills can be taught, learned. But character, grit, determination, now those are things you either have or you don't. And you, my dear, have them in spades. I stared at her, the offer sinking in. It was crazy, totally left field. Me, running a salon? But then, what did I have to lose? My career was in tatters, my personal life a disaster. I don't know what to say, Linda. I stammered, my mind racing. Say you'll think about it, she suggested, her smile reassuring. No pressure. But I've got a good feeling about this, about you. And hey, it comes with a place to stay. The apartment upstairs is vacant, and I'd be happy to cut you a deal on the rent. I was floored. A job and a place to stay? It was more than I could have hoped for in my darkest hour. It was a chance, a lifeline, a glimmer of hope in the endless night. Linda, thank you. I'll think about it, I promise, I managed to say, my voice thick with unshed tears. She gave my hand another squeeze. Take your time, honey. But remember, sometimes the best opportunities are the ones we never saw coming. I left the salon that day with a lighter heart than I'd had in months. The road ahead was uncertain, scary even. But for the first time in a long while, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't alone in this fight. Starting over ain't easy, especially when you're building from scratch. But sometimes, life gives you a second shot, and you've just gotta grab it with both hands. That's what I did at Linda's salon. It was a world away from the high-flying finance scene, but it had its own rhythm, its own pulse. And before long, I found myself getting into the groove of it. Linda was more than a boss, she was a mentor, a friend. She showed me the ropes, from managing bookings to handling the most colorful of clients. I threw myself into the work, letting it consume me, heal me. One day, after closing, we sat down, a couple of cold drinks in hand, going over the accounts. The numbers were looking good, better than good. You've got a real knack for this, you know, Linda said, her eyes sparkling with pride. I shrugged, a small smile playing on my lips. Guess I've always been good with numbers. And people. She nodded, taking a sip of her drink. It's more than that. You've got vision, drive. You've turned this place around. Heck, you're pulling in clients like I've never seen before. I chuckled, the sound surprising even to myself. Well, desperate times call for desperate measures. I just figured, why not try something new? What did we have to lose? Linda's smile widened. That's the spirit. And speaking of trying something new, I've been thinking. The way she trailed off, that twinkle in her eye, I knew she was onto something big. Out with it, Linda. What's cooking in that brain of yours? She leaned in, her voice dropping to an excited whisper. Expansion. This place is just the start. I'm thinking a chain, a brand. And I want you in on it. As a partner. The words hit me like a bolt of lightning. A partner. Me. After everything that had crumbled, here was a chance to build something new, something mine. Linda, are you sure? That's a huge step. She nodded, her gaze steady. I've never been sure of anything. You're not just rebuilding your life, you're helping me build my dream. We're a team, and together, we're unstoppable. I took a deep breath, letting the weight of her words sink in. This was it, a new chapter, a new beginning. From the ashes of my old life, here I was, rising, stronger, fiercer. All right, Linda. Let's do it. Let's build something amazing together. And we did. We worked hard, turning one salon into a chain of salons. Each new opening was a victory, a testament to our grit, our partnership. We were more than just a business, we were a force, a brand that stood for resilience, for beauty, for empowerment. Looking back, I couldn't believe how far I'd come. From the depths of despair to the heights of success. It wasn't just about the salons, the money, the recognition. It was about finding myself, my strength, my worth. The warm, inviting atmosphere of the salon buzzed with energy, a stark contrast to the cold, unforgiving streets outside. I was there, in my element, wrapping up Mrs. Jenkins' hairdo, her laughter mingling with the soft tunes playing in the background. The salon, my pride and joy, was more than just a business, it was a sanctuary, a testament to my journey. Mrs. Jenkins, with her sharp wit and warm heart, was in the middle of one of her famous anecdotes when the door burst open, sending a draft through the room. The chatter dipped into silence as Mike, my past mistake, walked in, swagger in his step, that same arrogant girl from years ago, clinging to his arm. His laughter, loud and mocking, sliced through the calm. "What's this? Zoya? The high-flying financial whiz turned scissor-happy hairdresser?" The girl with him, all smug smiles and judgmental glances, chimed in, her voice dripping with disdain. "Really hit rock bottom, haven't you? From boardroom to this quaint little salon." The air felt heavy, charged with unspoken words and suppressed emotions. I felt Mrs. Jenkins' grip tighten around my hand, her presence a silent pillar of strength. Without missing a beat, Mrs. Jenkins rose from her chair, her stature small, but her presence enormous. "You listen here, you ignorant fool. This woman, this hair snipper as you call her, she owns this place. Not just this one, but a whole chain of them. She's been in the papers, recognized as one of the most successful entrepreneurs around." Mike's smirk wavered, his companion's laughter faltering into an awkward silence. Mrs. Jenkins leaned in, her voice a fierce whisper that filled the room. "And you, I've seen you, parading around town, always a drink in hand, always on the brink of another shambles. It's you who's the embarrassment, not her. You're the one tossed from job to job like a rag doll." The salon was still, the air thick with tension. Mike, once towering with arrogance, now seemed smaller, his bravado fading under the weight of truth. He tried to interject, a weak, "Now, listen here," barely leaving his lips, before I cut him off. "Mike, your time here is done. You chose to walk out of my life, and that's where you'll stay. Out. You're not welcome here, not in my business, not in my life." His eyes met mine, a flurry of emotions passing through them, anger, shame, maybe a hint of regret. But it was too late. I had moved on, built a new life from the ashes of his betrayal. The girl with him, her confidence now a crumbled facade, tugged at his arm. "Let's go, Mike. This is pointless." They turned to leave, their exit as dramatic as their entrance, the door closing with a soft click behind them. The salon erupted into applause, a chorus of support and solidarity, Mrs. Jenkins leading the charge. She turned to me, her eyes softening. "You, my dear, are the epitome of grace and strength. Don't you ever forget that." The room slowly returned to its rhythm, the incident fading into just another story to tell. I looked around, my heart swelling with pride. These walls, these people, were a part of my story, a narrative of resilience, of rebirth. After the door closed on that chapter of my life, the salon, my sanctuary, felt even more like a haven. Linda, ever the pillar of strength and wisdom, sidled up to me as I was tidying up for the day. Her smile was as warm as the sunshine peeking through the windows. "You did good today, real good," she said, her eyes twinkling with a mix of pride and mischief. I chuckled, shaking my head. "Good? I feel like I just went 10 rounds in the ring." "Ah, but you came out on top. That's what counts," she insisted, giving me a gentle nudge. "And speaking of coming out on top, I've been thinking." That tone, that look in her eye, I knew it well. It meant Linda had another one of her grand ideas, the kind that had turned this salon from a dream into an empire. I leaned on the counter, my curiosity piqued. "Out with it then. What's brewing in that brilliant mind of yours?" She leaned in, her voice low and conspiratorial. "Expansion is great, we've nailed that. But what about branching out even more? I'm talking product lines, training academies, maybe even a reality show." Sky's the limit. The idea was bold, daunting, and utterly thrilling. The thought of turning our brand into something even bigger, touching more lives, igniting more dreams, it set my heart racing. Linda, that's huge, I stammered, the magnitude of her vision dawning on me. You really think we can pull it off? She scoffed, playfully swatting my arm. Think? Zoya, I know we can. Haven't we proved that already? We're a dynamite team. With your brains and my charm, we're unstoppable. Her confidence was infectious. I felt it, that familiar flare of excitement, the spark that had ignited my journey from the ashes of my past life. All right, Linda. Let's do it. Let's shake things up and see where we land. Her grin was all the answer I needed. We were in this together, ready to take on the world, one dream at a time. As the salon emptied and the lights dimmed, I took a moment to reflect. Life had thrown curveballs, heartache, and challenges my way. But it had also brought me friendships, triumphs, and a future bright with possibilities. I locked the door, the click echoing in the quiet street. The night was still, the stars overhead a silent chorus of witnesses to my resolve. Tomorrow was a new day, a new chapter. And I was ready for it, ready for the challenges, the adventures, the highs and lows. Ready to build, to dream, to soar. At first glance, my life with Mark seemed like a page ripped straight out of a glossy magazine. We were the perfect pair, the enviable couple. I, Monica, the diligent accountant, and he, the dashing new head of the department. Our story began at the office, where quick chats by the coffee machine blossomed into a whirlwind romance. Can't believe my luck, Mark would often say, his arm wrapped around me. From colleagues to life partners. It's like we were meant to be. I'd smile, nod, and play along. Yeah, who would have thought? The dream team, both at work and home. But as the pages of our story turned, the dream began to show its cracks. After we moved into my personal home, Mark's true colors started to seep through the facade of the perfect husband. He wanted the traditional setup, him, the breadwinner, me, the housewife. It's how it should be, Monica, he'd insist. My mom did it, your mom did it. It's tradition. I wanted to argue, to say that times had changed, but I swallowed my words. The prospect of starting a family, of building our little world, was too tempting. So, I hung up my accountant's hat and embraced the role of a housewife, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing on the horizon. The first drops hit when I noticed the trail of socks and underwear Mark left around the house. Seriously, Mark? Am I married to a man or a centipede? I joke, trying to keep the mood light. He'd laugh it off, clueless or indifferent to the chaos he was creating. Come on, Monica. It's just socks. No big deal. But it was a big deal. It was the dishes left by the TV, the pizza boxes on the armchair, the complete disregard for the sanctity of our home. I tried to talk to him, to make him see reason. Mark, this isn't working. You need to clean up after yourself. This is our home, not a frat house. His reaction was always the same, anger, defensiveness, and a barrage of excuses. I work all day, Monica. I don't have time for this. You're the housewife, remember? This is your job. Cooking, cleaning, trying to keep the peace, it was a never-ending cycle, a dance I performed to the tune of Mark's whims. But beneath the surface, resentment simmered, a silent scream against the life I was trapped in. Life with Mark's parents felt like a constant invasion. They had this way of just storming into our house, their presence as subtle as a sledgehammer. They never bothered to call ahead, they'd just show up, expecting to be fed and entertained. One afternoon, I was caught off guard by the sound of the doorbell. As I opened the door, there they were, Mark's parents, bags of shopping in hand, looking like they'd just claimed victory in some sort of retail battle. Well, aren't you going to invite us in, Monica? Mark's mom, Judy, asked with a tone that brooked no argument. I managed a weak smile, stepping aside. Of course, come on in. They made a beeline for the kitchen, settling themselves at the table as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "We thought we'd stop by. You know, save you the trouble of cooking for just you and Mark," Judy declared, unloading her shopping bags with a clatter. Stan, Mark's dad, chimed in, already eyeing the fridge. "Yeah, and we figured you'd appreciate the company." "What's for lunch then, Monica?" I felt a pang of irritation. My home, my sanctuary, had turned into a pit stop for their convenience. "I was just about to make some sandwiches," I said, trying to hide my frustration. Sandwiches turned into a full-blown meal as I found myself chopping, stirring, and frying, trying to meet their unspoken expectations. Mark wasn't any help. He'd just slump on the couch, his eyes glued to the TV, completely oblivious to the circus in the kitchen. Later, after they'd left, I tried to talk to Mark about it. "Your parents can't just drop by like this, Mark. It's exhausting. I can't even relax in my own home." He barely looked up from his phone. "Oh, come on, Monica. They're just being friendly. It's not a big deal." I could feel my patience wearing thin. "It is a big deal, Mark. I'm not here to wait on you and your parents hand and foot. I need some space, some respect." But my words seemed to bounce right off him. "They're family, Monica. That's just how family is. Besides, they think you enjoy it." I'd look in the mirror, the reflection staring back at me a far cry from the woman who once walked the office halls in sharp suits and high heels. Now, it was all baggy sweaters and messy buns, my appearance a casualty of the endless demands of my home life. I missed those days, the click-clack of my heels, the sense of purpose each morning brought. Now, my days were a whirlwind of pots and pans, of cleaning up after uninvited guests who treated my home like a pit stop. As the days turned into months, life with Mark grew colder, the distance between us widening like a chasm. His behavior started changing, subtle shifts at first, then more pronounced. A new haircut that made him look years younger, suits that screamed of trying too hard, and a scent that wasn't his usual. It was like he was morphing into someone else, someone I didn't recognize. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was just a phase, a midlife crisis maybe. But the nagging suspicion in my mind refused to be silenced. It gnawed at me, kept me awake at night. "Mark, is there something you're not telling me?" I finally asked one evening, the words spilling out before I could stop them. We were sitting at the dinner table, an ocean of silence between us. He looked up, startled, like he'd been caught off guard. "What do you mean, Monica?" "I'm not hiding anything." But his eyes, they darted away too quickly, his words a little too rushed. "It's just, you've changed, Mark. The clothes, the perfume. It's like you're a different person." He let out a forced chuckle, but there was no warmth in it. "Come on, Monica. A man can't spruce himself up? I'm just trying to keep things fresh, that's all." I wanted to believe him, I really did. But the doubts, once sown, refused to be uprooted. They grew, fed by his late nights at the office, the weekends he was suddenly too busy, the texts he'd quickly hide when I walked in. The truth, however brutal, couldn't be ignored any longer. So, when he stood up at one of those awkward dinners with his parents, his announcement hit me not like a surprise, but like a confirmation of what I'd already known deep down. "I'm filing for divorce, Monica," he declared, his voice steady, devoid of any emotion. "I've met someone else. Someone young, vibrant. She's everything you're not." The words cut through the room, leaving a trail of shock and disbelief. His parents looked from him to me, their expressions a mix of confusion and dismay. "Mark, what are you saying? This is your wife, for heaven's sake," his mom exclaimed, her voice a mix of anger and disbelief. "Yeah, son. You can't just throw away your marriage like this," his dad chimed in, his brow furrowed in concern. But Mark was relentless, his words a dagger twisting in my heart. "It's decided. I want a family, a son. And Monica, well, she's not up to it. She's let herself go. It's time for a fresh start. His mistress, he painted her like a trophy, a prize he'd won, while painting me, his wife of 5 years, as a worn-out shoe, discarded and forgotten. The divorce papers he slid across the table were just a formality, his signature a cold, impersonal stroke of ink. But as I took them, something inside me shifted. The pain, the betrayal, it sparked a fire, a determination to not let this be the end of my story. "Fine, Mark. I'm offering you a probation period," I said, my voice steady, my resolve firm. 3 months. If you succeed, I will give you a divorce without further ado. His smirk said it all. He thought he'd won, thought he'd broken me. But little did he know, he'd just awakened a sleeping tiger. Mark packed his things, his smugness almost tangible as he prepared to move in with his mistress. I watched him, my expression unreadable. "Enjoy your probation period, Mark. Make sure she's worth it." His grin was all the confirmation I needed that he had no idea what was coming. The moment he left, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was time for a fresh start, and not just for me. The moment I suggested the probation period, I knew it was a gamble. My friend, Lisa, thought I'd completely lost it. We sat in my kitchen, the room still echoing with the remnants of Mark's departure. "Monica, this is madness," Lisa exclaimed, her eyebrows knitted in concern. "You're just giving him a free pass to walk all over you." I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling the warmth spread through me. "No, Lisa. This isn't surrender. It's strategy. Mark thinks he's playing me, but he's actually walking right into my trap." Lisa looked skeptical, her arms crossed. "And what about his parents? They treat your place like a drive-through. You going to let that slide too?" A smirk tugged at the corner of my lips. "Oh, they're part of the plan too. Just wait and see." Sure enough, the very next day, as if on cue, Mark's parents barged in, their uninvited presence as predictable as ever. This time, though, I was ready. I stood in the doorway, blocking their path with a newfound resolve. "Monica, dear, move aside. We're famished," Mark's mom, Judy, declared, trying to push past me. "Not so fast," I said, standing my ground. "You're both on a 3-month probation period, just like Mark." The confusion on their faces was almost comical. "Probation period? What nonsense is this?" Mark's dad, Ron, blustered, his face turning a shade of red I hadn't seen before. "You heard me," I continued, my voice calm but firm. "It's time for some ground rules. My house isn't a diner, and I'm not your personal chef. Respect that, or find somewhere else to eat." Judy's mouth opened and closed, like a fish out of water. "But we're family, Monica. You can't just..." "I can, and I am," I interrupted, the power of taking control surging through me. "Family or not, everyone needs to respect my space. You've had a free pass for too long." Ron looked like he was about to argue further, but Judy placed a hand on his arm, a silent signal. They exchanged a look, a silent conversation passing between them. Finally, with a huff, Ron nodded. "Fine, Monica. We'll respect your probation period," he grumbled, the words clearly leaving a bitter taste in his mouth. The silence in the house was deafening after Mark and his parents left. It was the first time in years I had the space to just breathe. I looked around, taking in the quiet, and something inside me clicked. This was my chance, my time to rediscover the Monica I'd buried under layers of compromise and sacrifice. I started with small steps. First, it was the clutter Mark had left behind. I gathered his things, boxing them up, each item a farewell to the life I'd known. "This is for you, Monica," I whispered to myself. No looking back. Next, I tackled the mirror. The reflection staring back at me was a far cry from the vibrant woman I used to be. "Time to change that," I said, my voice a mix of determination and excitement. I rummaged through my closet, pushing past the shapeless clothes I'd hidden behind. Deep down, I found the outfits I'd worn back in my accounting days, sharp, chic, a reminder of the confident woman I was. I dressed, the fabric feeling like armor, and for the first time in ages, I smiled at my reflection. The transformation didn't stop there. I hit the ground running, literally. Each morning, I laced up my sneakers and pounded the pavement, the rhythm of my steps a chant of empowerment. "You're doing this, Monica. For you?" I'd tell myself as the miles flew by. My diet changed too. No more quick fixes or catering to uninvited guests. I cooked for one, savoring each meal as a celebration of my newfound independence. The beauty salon became my sanctuary. I sat in the stylist's chair, the buzz of the scissors a melody of change. "Just do it," I told the stylist. "I'm ready for a new me." And so, my hair was cut, my style revamped. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't just see Monica, I saw strength, resilience, the beauty of a woman reborn. One evening, as I reveled in the quiet of my home, Lisa dropped by, unannounced, but always welcome. Her jaw dropped when she saw me. "Monica, is that really you?" she gasped, her eyes wide with amazement. I laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "The one and only." "What do you think?" Lisa circled me, her expression one of pure awe. I think Mark won't know what hit him." "You're stunning, Monica. Truly." The compliment warmed my heart, but I knew the transformation ran deeper than appearances. "It's not for Mark, Lisa. It's for me. I'm rediscovering the Monica I lost, and you know what? She's pretty amazing." Lisa hugged me, her support as unwavering as ever. "She always was, Monica. She always was." With my confidence restored and my spirit unbroken, I took the next step. I dusted off my resume, the document a testament to my skills and achievements. Interviews were lined up, each one an opportunity, a doorway to the future I was building for myself. 2 months after Mark's departure, my quiet routine was interrupted by a call that I had anticipated, yet it still held a tinge of surprise. Mark's name flashed on my phone screen, and I answered with a mix of curiosity and a well-concealed sense of triumph. "Monica, I need your help." Mark's voice came through, tinged with a desperation I hadn't heard before. "She's left me. Said she couldn't deal with my habits, the socks, the mess. I'm alone, Monica." I leaned against the kitchen counter, a sly smile playing on my lips. "Really, Mark? That's unfortunate. But what exactly do you want from me now?" His voice cracked slightly. "I want to come back, Monica. I realize I made a mistake. Can we meet? Please?" The words I had been waiting to say came out smoothly. "All right, Mark. Let's have dinner this Saturday at our place. We'll talk then." I could hear the relief mixed with a note of triumph in his voice. "Thank you, Monica. I'll be there. I knew you'd give us another chance." After the call, the wheels in my mind began to turn. This dinner would be more than just a meal, it would be my stage. I promptly called Mark's parents, extending the invitation for what I knew would be an unforgettable evening. "Judy, Ron, I thought you should join us for dinner this Saturday. Mark will be there," I said, my voice steady and inviting. Judy's response was quick and enthusiastic. "Oh, Monica, that's wonderful news. We've been so worried about you too. It's about time things went back to normal." Ron's voice rumbled through the phone. "Yes, we're looking forward to it, Monica. It's good to have the family back together." Little did they know that normal was the furthest thing from what this dinner was going to be about. I spent the next few days planning not just the menu, but also how I would articulate the newfound clarity and strength I had garnered in their absence. Saturday arrived, bringing with it a moment I had anticipated yet dreaded. The doorbell's chime echoed through the house, a herald of the impending confrontation. I took a deep breath and opened the door. There stood Mark, suitcases in tow, a smirk painting his face. Behind him, Judy and Ron loomed, their expressions a mixture of hope and silent expectations. "I knew you'd come to your senses," Mark said, his voice dripping with a misplaced confidence as his eyes roamed over the new me. Wow, Monica, you look incredible. See, I told you she'd come around, he said, turning to his parents with an air of triumph. Judy chimed in, her voice tinged with relief. Oh, Monica, we're so glad. It's about time things got back to how they were. I motioned for them to sit, my demeanor calm but firm. Please, let's settle down. We have much to discuss. As we gathered in the living room, an awkward tension hung in the air, thick and palpable. Mark, with a misplaced sense of victory, took the lead. Monica, I can't tell you how good it is to be back. I've missed us. And you've really changed. I met his gaze, my own unwavering. I didn't change for you. I changed for me. Mark, what you're seeing isn't a welcome back. It's a goodbye. The shock on his face was mirrored in his parents' expressions. Judy's hand flew to her mouth, and Ron's brow furrowed in confusion. What do you mean, Monica? Judy managed to ask, her voice a quiver of disbelief. Mark left because he thought he'd found something better. But life outside wasn't what he expected, was it? I said, turning my attention back to Mark, who seemed to shrink under the weight of my words. It's not like that, Monica. I realized I made a mistake. That woman, she was nothing compared to you. She left because she couldn't handle, well, the things you always took care of. Mark stuttered, his bravado fading with each word. You mean your mess, your irresponsibility. I corrected him sharply. And now you think you can just waltz back in here, back into my life? Judy interjected, her voice laced with desperation. But Monica, he's realized his mistake. Can't you give him another chance? No, Judy. A mistake is forgetting to pay a bill, not destroying a marriage. And Ron, you both need to understand that my home is not your convenience. I continued, addressing each of them, making sure my stance was clear. Ron, who had been silent, finally spoke, his voice a low rumble. But we're family, Monica. Family sticks together. That's just it, Ron. Family respects each other. Mark disrespected our marriage, and you both disrespected my home. That's not family, that's taking advantage. Mark, now fully deflated, made one last plea. Monica, please, I have nowhere else to go. I'll change, I swear. I stood up, my resolve as solid as ever. It's too late for promises, Mark. We're done. And as for having nowhere to go, that was your choice when you left. I've moved on. You gave me these divorce papers, I said, holding them up. And I signed them. We've been officially divorced for 2 months. The room went silent, the shock palpable in the air. Mark's parents looked from him to me, disbelief written all over their faces. You're divorced? Judy finally managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. I nodded. Yes, and now, I'd like Mark to collect his things and leave my house. And Judy, Ron, I wish you well, but from now on, my home is my own, I declared, the finality in my tone broking no argument. Mark was grasping at straws now, desperation clear in his voice. Monica, please, I made a mistake. I'll change, I promise. I'll clean, I'll cook, I'll do anything. But my decision was firm. It's too late, Mark. It's over between us. And just so you know, I got a job as an accountant while you were away. I don't need you to take care of me. He was floundering, his pleas becoming more frantic. But Monica, you can't do this. I have nowhere to go. That's not my problem anymore, Mark. If you don't leave, I'll call the police, I said, my tone leaving no room for negotiation. At that point, Judy and Ron stood up, their faces a mix of disappointment and realization. They approached Mark, each taking one of his arms. Let's go, son. You've made your bed, now you have to lie in it, Ron said, his voice heavy with resignation. Before they left, Judy turned to me, her eyes softening. Monica, you're right. Our son was a fool to let a woman like you go. Life, after Mark and his parents' departure, settled into a rhythm that was all my own. I heard bits and pieces about Mark through the grapevine, friends who couldn't help but share the latest gossip. They said he was living with his parents again, struggling to find his footing in a world where he couldn't just rely on someone else to clean up his messes. "Monica, you won't believe what I saw today," Lisa said one afternoon, her voice a mix of amusement and disbelief. "Mark was at the grocery store, and let me tell you, he looked rough. Hair all over the place, clothes mismatched. It's like he's lost without you." I couldn't help but feel a twinge of vindication. "Well, Lisa, that's what happens when you take everything for granted. Eventually, you have to face the consequences." The word was that Mark tried his hand at dating again, but no surprise, it didn't go too well. The same issues that drove me away were now driving away other potential partners. "He's demanding, messy, just a lot to handle," a mutual friend shared. "No one wants to put up with that." I nodded, a sense of closure enveloping me. "Some lessons are learned the hard way," I said, not without a hint of satisfaction. As for me, life had taken a turn for the better, a stark contrast to the disheveled, pathetic figure Mark had become. I got a job as an accountant again, my mind sharp, my contributions valued. The office was a buzz of activity, a place where I thrived, surrounded by numbers and reports. And it wasn't just my career that had taken a turn for the better. My personal life was blossoming too. There was someone new, someone who was everything Mark wasn't. His name was Daniel, and he brought a sense of calm, a respect that I had longed for. As the days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, my life was a testament to resilience, a story of rising from the ashes. Mark, now just a distant memory, was a reminder of what I had overcome. I was Monica, no longer the shadow of someone else's demands or expectations.